Chapter 1, Wishes. The void wasn't exactly what I expected. As a lifelong consumer of isekai light novels, anime, and enough fanfiction to worry a mental health professional, I had theories. I expected a river of souls, or maybe a fiery judgment, or perhaps just a game over screen with a coin slot. Instead, I got an office. And not just any office. It was a pristine, terrifyingly white room that smelled faintly of vanilla and old parchment. In the center sat a mahogany desk that looked expensive enough to buy a small country. Behind it sat him. He was reading a file, looking over spectacles that perched on the bridge of a nose I had seen in a dozen blockbuster movies. He wore a white suit that radiated an aura of calm authority. He looked up, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of infinite wisdom and mild amusement. "Ah," he said. The voice was like warm molasses pouring over gravel. It was the voice that narrated penguins, prison breaks, and the dawn of creation. "You're awake. Good. We have much to discuss, son." I stared. I blinked. I pinched my spectral arm, which felt surprisingly solid. You're Morgan Freeman." He chuckled, a sound that made my soul vibrate. "I am what your mind can comprehend. If I appeared as a burning wheel of eyes and wings, you'd soil yourself, and we don't have janitors in the space between spaces. Your subconscious chose the face of authority, wisdom, and comfort. Hence, Morgan." "Right," I managed, my otaku brain already running a mile a minute. "Rob. This is an Rob scenario. Keep it cool. Don't be cringe." "So, I'm dead." "Truck kun. Vending machine," Morgan corrected gently, closing the file. It tipped. "You were trying to retrieve a bag of spicy chips." A tragic, yet oddly fitting end for a man of your specific hobbies. I felt a blush rise on my cheeks. It was a limited edition flavor. "So, what now? Heaven? Hell? Reincarnation as a slime?" Morgan leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Reincarnation. But not as a slime. I have a vacancy in a universe that desperately needs a course correction. A timeline that has grown stagnant and depressing. I need someone who knows the script but isn't afraid to improvise. Someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously." He pointed a finger at me. "I'm sending you to Westeros." The blood or whatever spectral fluid filled my veins ran cold. Westeros? Game of Thrones, Westeros? The place where the weddings are red, the zombies are ice cold, and good people exist solely to be traumatized and decapitated. The very same. "Hard pass," I said, crossing my arms. "Send me to Pokemon. Or Harry Potter. I'll even take Naruto if I don't have to be a side character. But Westeros? That's a meat grinder. I like my head attached to my neck, thanks." Morgan smiled, and it was the smile of a man who held all the cards. "You don't have a choice in the destination, son. But you do have a choice in how you play the game. You're going as a Stark." I groaned. "Please tell me I'm not Bran. I don't want to be a tree wizard. Or Rob. I have a thing against crossbows." "Eddard," Morgan said, dropping the name like a judge's gavel. "You are to be Eddard Stark. The Quiet Wolf. The Lord of Winterfell." I gaped at him. "Ned? You want me to be Ned Honorable Fool Stark? The guy whose death literally kicks off the worst war in the continent's history? The guy played by Sean Bean? That is a death sentence. It's practically written in the laws of physics. Which is why," Morgan continued, ignoring my panic, "I am offering you a severance package. Compensation for the hazardous working conditions." My ears perked up. "Here it comes. The cheat codes." 3 wishes, Morgan said, holding up 3 fingers. "Within reason. No, I want to be omnipotent. No, I want One Punch Man power. No, I want the gates of Babylon. You are there to live, to struggle, and to change things. Not to play God. That's my job. I took a deep breath, pacing around the White Office. Okay. Ned Stark. The North. The threats are White Walkers, Lannisters, Littlefinger, and the sheer incompetence of the South. I needed power. I needed infrastructure. I needed time. I stopped pacing and looked Morgan in the eye. Okay. If I'm going to survive the Game of Thrones, I need to bring something to the table that Westeros has never seen. Something spiritual but martial. Something that fits the vibe but breaks the rules. Go on, Morgan said, leaning forward. Wish number 1, I announced, pointing a finger at the ceiling. I want the Force. The whole package. Light side, dark side, universal aspects. Telekinesis, sensing danger, physical augmentation, mind tricks, lightning if I need it. I want the potential of a Skywalker with the balance of a Grey Jedi. Morgan pursed his lips, humming thoughtfully. The Force. An elegant weapon for a more civilized age. A bit anachronistic for knights and dragons, isn't it? Is it? I countered. The North is all about the old gods. Mysterious powers, trees that see everything, a connection to nature. The Force fits perfectly. It's not magic like the Red Priests use, it's a connection to the life energy of the world. It's not overpowered in the sense that I can't wipe out an army with a wave Jedi die to blaster fire all the time if they're overwhelmed. I can still be killed by a stray arrow or a shadow baby. But it gives me an edge in a duel and, more importantly, precognition. I need to know when Littlefinger is lying, which is always. Morgan nodded slowly. Fair points. The Force is adaptable. It is bound to life, and Westeros is teeming with it, despite the death. Granted. You shall have the sensitivity and the potential. But you will have to train it. You don't wake up lifting X-wings. I can work with that, I said. Then, a thought struck me. A lonely Jedi is just a wizard with a sword. But wait. This leads to a subclause of the wish. I need to be able to teach it. What good is being a general if my soldiers are just fodder? Can I awaken the Force in others? Can I make the Starks Jedi? Morgan laughed, a deep, resonant belly laugh. The Jedi of Winterfell. I can see the fanfiction titles now. But yes, this is an interesting ripple. I will allow it, but not because you asked nicely. I will allow it because it fits the lore better than you think. How so? I asked, genuinely curious. The old gods, Morgan explained, his voice taking on that narrator quality again, explaining the secrets of the universe. What do you think the Green Seers tap into? What is the Weirwood Net? It is a primitive, biological interface with the cosmic force. The first men had the potential in their blood. The Andals diluted it with their faith in the Seven. By bringing the Force back, you aren't introducing something new, son. You are reawakening the true heritage of the first men. The Starks have the blood of the Kings of Winter. The midi-chlorians don't make that face, their just biology have been dormant. You will act as the catalyst. So, the Stark kids can be Padawans? I asked, grinning. Arya with the Force? She'll be terrifying. Arya with the Force is a nightmare I am willing to unleash upon the phrase, Morgan agreed with a twinkle in his eye. Granted. You can teach those with the aptitude, and the aptitude will be highest in the blood of the first men. I was about to move on to my second wish when a sudden, brilliant connection fired in my brain. It was the kind of galaxy brain realization that usually came at 3 a.m. while scrolling through wiki pages. Wait a second, I said, holding up a hand. The Force is about connection. Binding living things together. And the Starks are wargs. Skin changers. Morgan leaned back, intrigued. Go on. Warging is telepathy, I reasoned, pacing faster now. It's projecting consciousness into another being. That's essentially a force technique. Beast control. Bond. Whatever you want to call it. So, if I have the force, and I'm a Stark, does that mean the direwolves aren't just pets? Morgan smiled, a slow, knowing smile. You are connecting the dots. The direwolves sent by the old gods are already magical constructs, woven from the magic of the north. By introducing the force, you are effectively supercharging that biological interface. My jaw dropped. So it's a force bond? Like Ravan and Bastilla, but with a giant wolf. Precisely, Morgan confirmed. It won't just be skin changing, where you override the animal. It will be a symbiotic force dyad. Your wolf will be an extension of your will, and you of theirs. They will be sensitive to your force usage. They will grow stronger as you do. Jedi wolves, I whispered, vibrating with pure otaku delight. I can teach a dire wolf to use mind tricks? I can have a wolf that senses danger before it happens? The Boltons are going to be so confused when a wolf dodges an arrow because it saw it coming 3 seconds ago. Just don't try to give them lightsabers, Morgan warned, though his eyes danced with amusement. They lack the opposable thumbs. I make no promises, I muttered, filing that away for later. Okay, that is infinitely cooler. Wish one is looking solid. Now, for number 2. The force makes me a warrior, but a warrior can't feed a kingdom during a decade-long winter, I continued, getting back on track. The north is poor, undeveloped, and empty. I need knowledge. What kind of knowledge? The Dr. Stone kind. The Civilization 6 kind, I said. I want a library in my head. Engineering, agriculture, metallurgy, sanitation, basic medicine, glassmaking, crop rotation. Everything needed to jumpstart an industrial revolution, or at least a high medieval agricultural revolution. I need to know how to build greenhouses that survive -50 degrees. I need to know how to make steel that doesn't shatter. I need to turn the North into an economic powerhouse so we can afford to fight the dead. Morgan nodded approvingly. Infrastructure. Very pragmatic. Most people ask for a dragon. You ask for crop rotation. Dragons eat sheep. Crop rotation makes more sheep. It's simple math, I quipped. Very well, Morgan said. You shall possess the wiki of civilization, as you would call it. It will be intuitive. You won't be a walking textbook, but when you look at a problem like a freezing field or a rusted plow, the solution and the method to improve it will appear in your mind. However, knowing how to build a blast furnace and actually getting medieval peasants to build one are two different things. That leads to wish number 3, I said, rubbing my hands together. I'm an otaku. We are notoriously lazy. And I'm going into a body that needs to learn swordplay, politics, the force, and how to build a steam engine. I don't have enough hours in the day. Get to the point, Morgan said, checking a golden pocket watch that appeared out of nowhere. I want a multiplier. A learning and training booster. Let's say 10x. If I swing a sword for an hour, my muscles and muscle memory gain the benefit of 10 hours. If I meditate on the force for a night, I gain a week's worth of focus. If I study a map, I memorize it instantly. It applies to my body's cultivation of the force and my physical stats. I want to become a powerhouse, but I want to earn it just faster. Morgan looked at me over his spectacles. 10x? That's pushing the not overpowered clause. Is it? I argued. The Night King has had thousands of years. The mountain is a genetic freak. Arthur Dane was a god with a sword. I'm starting late. I need to catch up. I'm not asking for instant mastery. I'm asking for efficiency. I still have to put in the work. It's just high-yield investment. Morgan tapped his chin. You make a compelling case. The timeline is tight. Robert's Rebellion, the Greyjoy Rebellion, the long summer, you will need every second. Very well. The 10x multiplier is granted. Your body and mind will be a sponge for experience. He closed the file with a definitive thump. 3 wishes. The force and the ability to teach it, linked to the old gods and amplified by direwolf bonds. The encyclopedia of civilization. And a 10x growth multiplier. You are equipped to change the world, Eddard Stark. Thank you, Mora, Rob, I said, feeling a surge of excitement. So, do I wake up as a baby? Do I have to go through diaper changing? Because that's a deal breaker. Morgan stood up, smoothing his suit. You do wake up as a baby. But you won't be changing your own diapers. In fact, you won't even know you're doing it. That is the condition. Condition? I asked warily. You will be reincarnated as the infant Eddard Stark, Morgan stated clearly. And you will be you. Me. Yes. No doer, somber quiet wolf from the start. Your personality, your easygoing nature, your quirks. They will be the dominant traits. You won't be the stoic Stark history remembers, you'll be the Stark that laughs too much, sleeps in, and probably annoys Jonaran to no end. Sounds fun, I said. But what's the catch? The catch is the memory, Morgan said, tapping his temple. You will be you, but you won't remember why you are you. You won't remember Earth, anime, Star Wars, or this office. You will just be a naturally eccentric, oddly intelligent Stark boy who doesn't quite fit the grim northern mold. So I'm flying blind? I asked. Until the moment the mantle falls, Morgan confirmed. When you become the Lord of Winterfell. The trauma of your father and brother's deaths, that is the key. In that moment of grief and new responsibility, the dam breaks. Your memories of Earth and your granted powers will unlock. You will realize that your strange intuition was the force, and your weird ideas were echoes of another world. It was a strange trade-off. To live a life as myself, but without the context of my own existence, until tragedy struck. But it meant I wouldn't be bored, and the North might get a lord who knew how to smile before the long night came. I accept, I said quietly. I'll take the burden. Morgan smiled, a genuine, warm expression that made everything feel like it was going to be all right. I know you will. That's why I picked you. You have a good heart, underneath all those layers of irony and pop culture. He stepped back, and the white room began to dissolve at the edges, turning into mist. One last piece of advice, Morgan said, his voice echoing as he began to fade. The Force is about balance. The North is about survival. Don't lose yourself in the power. And for God's sake. He paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. Try to keep your head. I laughed. I actually laughed. I'll try. Hey, Morgan. Yes. Do I get a cool catchphrase? Make your own, the voice boomed, now coming from everywhere and nowhere. Good luck, Lord Stark. Winter is coming. Make sure you're ready. The white room vanished. The smell of vanilla was replaced by the smell of cold stone and pine needles. And then, there was nothing but the long, dark dream, waiting for the fire to wake me up. Chapter 2, Wake Up. If death was the great unknown, then waking up the morning after drinking half the Vale's supply of Arbor Gold with Robert Baratheon was the great regret for Eddard Stark. His head felt like a construction crew was renovating the inside of his skull with jackhammers. His mouth tasted like something had died in it, possibly a small rodent. He groaned, trying to bury his face into the pillow to escape the cruel, piercing ray of sunlight stabbing through the arrow loop of his guest chambers in the eyrie. 5 more minutes, Mom, he mumbled into the linen. Then, he froze. Mom? His mother, Lyra Stark, had died years ago. He remembered her vague scent, the warmth of her hands. Wait. No. He remembered Earth. He remembered electricity. He remembered the internet. He remembered arguing on forums about whether a lightsaber could cut through Superman's chest. He remembered the White Room. He remembered Morgan Freeman. When the mantle falls, the dam breaks. The pain in his head wasn't just a hangover anymore. It was the metaphysical equivalent of a zip file extracting 20 years of repressed memories and cosmic cheat codes into a biological brain all at once. Ned sat up, gasping as the vertigo hit. It was real. All of it. The truck, the void, the wishes. He was him. He was Eddard Stark, second son of Winterfell, but he was also the guy who once spent 3 weeks optimizing a wheat farm in Minecraft. The memories of the last 20 years as Ned swirled and mixed with the memories of his old life. He remembered fostering here in the Eyrie. He remembered the laughing games with Robert. He remembered the crushing, suffocating weight that had landed on his shoulders last night. The Raven. The death of his father and brother. The demand for their heads. The grief hit him like a physical blow to the gut. It was fresh, raw, and agonizing. But alongside the grief, a cold, sharp clarity cut through the fog. This is the catalyst. This is where the story begins. His throat felt like sandpaper. He needed water. He turned to the bedside table. There was a pitcher there. Okay, he croaked, staring at the pewter vessel. Time to test the merchandise. He took a deep breath, extended his hand, and narrowed his eyes. He reached out with his feelings, trying to tap into the mystic energy field that binds the galaxy together. He visualized the pitcher sliding across the wood and into his grasp. Move. Nothing happened. He strained harder, furrowing his brow until his headache spiked. Come to me. The pitcher remained stubbornly stationary, obeying only the laws of gravity and friction. Right, he muttered, dropping his hand. No cheat codes on startup. Level 1. Got it. He leaned over and grabbed the pitcher with his actual hand. It was heavy, cold, and entirely mundane. He drank greedily, the cool water soothing his throat, but his mind was racing. Morgan hadn't given him powers, he had given him potential. He had the midichlorians, or whatever the Westerosi equivalent was, and he had the 10x growth multiplier, but right now, he was just a hungover guy in a medieval castle. He had to work for it. He swung his legs out of bed and stood up. The floor was freezing stone, biting into his bare feet. He rubbed his temples, willing the headache to subside. The knowledge he had asked for was there, though. He looked at the drafty window and immediately knew how to construct a double-paned glass insulation system using sand, ash, and a specific heating process. Useful. But it wouldn't stop a sword. He walked to the heavy oak door and pulled it open. A young servant boy was passing by, carrying a bundle of linens. He jumped when he saw the Stark Lord. My lord, he squeaked. I didn't know you were awake. Hot water, Ned croaked. His voice sounded deeper than he remembered. I need a bath. Hot enough to boil a lobster. And bring fresh clothes. The boy nodded frantically and scampered off. 20 minutes later, Ned was submerged in a wooden tub filled with steaming water. It was glorious, though the soap was essentially a block of animal fat and ash that smelled faintly of lavender. He made a mental note to improve soap production later. The chemistry was simple enough, but for now, he just focused on scrubbing the medieval grime off. He looked at his arms. Lean, corded with muscle from years of sparring, but nothing supernatural. He squeezed the wet rag. It felt like squeezing a rag. 10x multiplier, he whispered to the steam. That means every push-up is 10. Every hour of meditation is 10. I need to start training. Immediately. He washed quickly. Drying off, he dressed in the clothes the servant had laid out: a grey doublet, heavy wool breeches, and leather boots. Everything felt heavy, textured. Reality was high definition. He caught his reflection in a polished bronze mirror. Long face, dark hair, grey eyes that looked far too old for a man of 20. And then, the other memory hit him. The one that wasn't strictly his, yet felt more real than the stone under his feet. The Tower of Joy. The bed of blood and roses. Promise me, Ned. Lyanna. His sister wasn't just kidnapped. He knew the truth, or at least, the truth of a TV show and 1,000 fan theories. She was with Rhaegar. Willing or prophesied, it didn't matter now. The tragedy was already in motion. For a second, panic flared in his chest. Should he tell Robert? Should he ride south instead of north? No. Telling Robert now would turn his righteous fury into a blind, destructive rage that would burn the realm down before they could save it. And Lyanna, well, that was a fixed point in time. He couldn't change the past that had already happened, and he wasn't sure he should mess with the future that gave the world its savior. He closed his eyes, trying to center himself, to push the anxiety into the Force like a Jedi would. He felt nothing. Just the cold air of the room and the thumping of his own anxious heart. Okay, he exhaled, opening his eyes. No Force calm yet. Just deep breaths. Let the river flow. I will face the tower when I get there. Until then, I have a war to win. Time to face the music, he said, strapping on his sword belt. Ned left his chambers and navigated the winding corridors of the Eyrie toward the High Hall's solar. As he walked, he decided to try one more time. He slowed his pace, soft boots padding on the stone. He closed his eyes for a stride, reaching out. Trying to sense. Is there a guard around the corner? He saw only the blackness of his eyelids. He heard only the wind. He sighed, opening his eyes just in time to nod to the 2 guards standing around the corner. They looked bored. He had sensed absolutely nothing. I have a lot of meditation to do on the road, he thought grimly. If I want to dodge arrows, I better start practicing my breathing exercises. He found Jonaran in his solar. The Lord of the Eyrie looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. His face was drawn, pale, and edged with worry. He was staring at a map of the Vale, a half-eaten loaf of bread on the table beside him. Ned, Jon said, looking up as he entered. His voice was gentle, full of the pity Ned didn't want. I didn't expect to see you up so early. Robert is still indisposed. Robert is mourning in his own way, Ned said, closing the door behind him. I mourn in mine. And right now, my mourning requires action. He walked over to the table, standing beside the man who had been a second father to him. He looked down at the map. The Vale was a fortress, impregnable by land. But they couldn't stay here. We are at war, Jon, he stated calmly. We are, Jon agreed, sighing heavily. We have already sent ravens to your bannermen, calling them to, well, to prepare. But getting you to them? That is the problem. Gulltown is the only major port, and Mark Grafton has declared for the Targaryens. He won't let you leave. I know, Ned said. Gulltown is a trap. I can't go by the main road. He traced a line on the map with his finger. A line that went west, away from the safety of the high road, straight into the jagged, terrifying peaks that bordered the Vale. I'm taking the Mountains of the Moon, he said. I'll cross the ridges to the Fingers. From there, I can find a fisherman to sail me across the Bight to White Harbor. Jonaran stared at him as if he had just suggested flying by flapping his arms. The Mountains of the Moon. Jon sputtered. Ned, have you lost your wits? The mountain clans are swarming there. The burned men, the painted dogs, they don't care about your name or your honor. They will slit your throat for your boots and leave you for the crows. It's the only way, Jon, Ned insisted, his voice steady. The roads are watched. The ports are closed. If I stay here, I'm a sitting duck. The North needs a Stark now. Benyon is just a boy. They need me to call the banners. It is suicide, John warned, slamming his hand on the table. You are one man. Even with a sword, you cannot fight a dozen clansmen in their own territory. Wait. We will take Gulltown by force. It will take time, but... We don't have time, Ned interrupted. He looked John in the eye. He didn't have a magical aura or a glowing sword. He just had the memories of a man who knew exactly what was coming, and the desperate certainty that he needed to be ready for it. Winter is coming, John. And so is Ares's army. I have to reach Winterfell. He gripped the hilt of his sword. It felt heavy in his hand, a reminder that he was mortal. Besides, he added, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. I've been trained by the best. And I have a long ride to think about my future. John looked at him for a long moment, searching for the shy, quiet boy he had fostered. He didn't find him. Instead, he found a man who looked ready to walk through hell and complain about the heating bill. You have the stark stubbornness, John muttered, shaking his head. Very well. If you are determined to die, I cannot stop you. But take care, Ned. For all our sakes. I will, Ned promised. I'll see you on the Trident, John. He turned to leave, his mind already racing through alpine survival techniques and scanning the memories of maps he had studied in another life. The mountains of the moon were dangerous. He was one man, with no powers yet, just a head full of knowledge and a body that learned fast. Time to grind, he thought, stepping out into the cold corridor. Tutorial starts now. Chapter 3, The Wolf Packs. The walk back to his guest chambers felt longer than the climb up the giant's lance. The adrenaline of the meeting with Jonaran was fading, replaced by the cold, hard reality of logistics. Ned pushed open the door to his room and stood there for a moment, staring at the trappings of a high lord. Silk tunics, velvet doublets, and a cloak embroidered with silver thread. Beautiful things. Useless things. He kicked the door shut. Right. Time to strip the Stark. Before he called for aid, he paused. The room was silent, save for the whistling of the wind. If I have the potential, he thought, I should be able to feel life. He closed his eyes, steadying his breathing. He reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind, trying to push past the throbbing of his headache. At first, there was nothing. Just the cold stone and the dark. Then, a faint ripple. A small, nervous heartbeat standing just down the corridor. A shuffle of feet. Someone is there. He opened his eyes, a small smile touching his lips. It wasn't much, barely a whisper of a sensation, but it was there. The radar was working, even if the battery was low. He grabbed a bell pull, yanking it 3 times. Moments later, the young steward Michael, if Ned's memory served, poked his head in. My lord. Michael, Ned said, already stripping off the fine grey doublet. I need supplies. Not the pretty stuff. I need the gear the mule handlers use. Thick wool. Boiled leather. And I need dried beef, hard cheese, and a waterskin that doesn't leak. Michael blinked, confused. My lord, the kitchens can prepare a roast fowl for your journey. No fowl, Ned interrupted, tossing the doublet onto the bed. I'm not going on a picnic, Michael. I'm going into the mountains. I need food that won't spoil and clothes that won't tear when I'm sliding down a scree slope. And rope. 50 feet of hemp rope. Go. The boy scrambled away. Ned turned to his boots. They were good riding boots, calfskin, and supple. He drew his dagger. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he began to carve harsh, jagged grooves into the solace of the expensive boots. He needed grip. He needed friction. He slashed the leather with grim determination, ruining the craftsmanship to save his neck. When Michael returned with the bundle of rough-spun clothes, Ned was waiting with a candle and a small pot of tallow he'd found near the hearth. My lord. Michael hesitated, watching Ned smear the thick, greasy fat over the seams of the waterskin and the stitching of his boots. "What are you doing?" "Waterproofing," Ned muttered, his eyes focused on the task. "If water gets into the seams, it freezes," Ned explained, rubbing the grease in until the leather turned dark and ugly. "If it freezes, it expands. If it expands, the boot bursts, and I lose a toe to frostbite. I like my toes, Michael." Michael watched him with a mix of horror and awe. "Is that a northern trick, my lord?" "Something like that," Ned said, grabbing the rough cloak Michael had brought. It smelled of the stables. "Perfect. This will mask my scent." He tossed a silver stag to the boy. "Forget you saw me packing like a commoner." Michael caught the coin, eyes widening. "I saw nothing, my lord. Just a wolf preparing for winter." Ned smirked. "Smart lad." Fully packed and looking thoroughly disreputable in his rough wools and greased boots, Ned made his way to the guest solar. He could hear Robert before he saw him. The sound of something shattering against a stone wall echoed down the corridor. Ned stepped inside. Robert Baratheon was pacing like a caged tiger, a new goblet of wine in his hand, while the shards of a pitcher lay in a puddle near the hearth. "That pitcher isn't Rhaegar, you know," Ned noted dryly, leaning against the door frame. Robert spun around, his face flushed with wine and fury. "Ned! John says you're leaving." "Actually leaving? By the mountains." "John is right," Ned said, walking into the room. "I ride within the hour." "You're mad," Robert growled, slamming his goblet down on the table. Wine sloshed over the map of West Eros. "Stay here. We fight at Gulltown. We smash Grafton, take the port, and sail north like civilized men." "Gulltown could take a month to fall, Robert," Ned countered, ignoring the mess. "A month we don't have. Ares isn't waiting. He's calling his banners. If I don't get the north, we have no army. Just 2 angry wards in a mountain castle. I have an army." Robert roared, thumping his chest. "I am the Lord of Storm's End." "Yes, we have," Ned pointed out calmly. "But you need to get to them. I need to get to mine." "We can't do that," holding hands in the veil. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the wine-stained table. "And Robert, listen to me closely. The Tyrells are opportunists. Mace Tyrell won't risk his flower knights in open battle against you if he can help it. He'll march on Storm's End. He'll try to starve your brother out while you're in the field." Robert frowned, the bluster fading for a moment. "Stannis? He's made of iron. He won't break." "Iron breaks," Ned warned sharply. "It doesn't bend, but it breaks. When you leave Storm's End to join the war, tell Stannis to prepare for a long siege. Tell him to stock the granaries, salt every fish, and count every grain. If Tyrell parks his army on your lawn, Stannis needs to hold the line for a year, maybe more. If Storm's End falls, the rebellion loses the south." Robert stared at him, the fog of wine clearing from his eyes as the strategic merit sank in. He nodded slowly. "You're right. Stannis is a sour prick, but he's stubborn as a mule. If I tell him to hold, he'll eat the rats before he surrenders. I'll make sure he knows." Robert slumped into a chair, the anger draining out of him, leaving only a raw, bruised sadness. "It's not right, Ned. Leaving me here. Alone with John and his prudence." Ned pulled out a chair and sat opposite him. "You won't be alone. You'll have the Knights of the Vale. And you'll have a war to plan. John needs you, Robert. He needs your fire. He's cautious. You're a drunk," Robert offered bitterly. "A hammer," Ned corrected. "You're the warmer of the rebellion, Bobby. You just need to find something to hit." Robert snorted, a reluctant smile tugging at his beard. "Don't call me Bobby. Makes me sound like a stable boy. I'll call you your grace when you sit on the Iron Throne, Ned said, the words slipping out before he could check them. Robert laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Me? On that chair of swords? Gods forbid. I'm fighting for Lyanna, Ned. And for your father. And Brandon. Not for a crown. Ned felt a twinge in his gut at the mention of Lyanna. The secret lay heavy in his mind, locked behind the dam of his memory. Promise me, Ned. We're fighting to survive, Bobby, Ned said softly. Just, try to stay sober enough to swing that hammer, all right. Robert reached across the table, his massive hand gripping Ned's forearm. I will. I swear it. But you watch your back in those mountains. If some painted savage kills you, I'll never forgive you. If I die, Ned said, standing up and gripping Robert's arm back, you have my permission to drink a toast at my funeral. Just make sure it's good wine. The best, Robert promised, his eyes wet. Arbor Gold. Or Dornish Red. Something that tastes like summer. The wind in the courtyard was biting, whipping Ned's new, stable-smelling cloak around his legs. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening snow. Jonaran stood by the gate, looking frail in his heavy furs. Next to him, Robert looked like a giant, his warhammer resting casually on his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. A groom brought forward the horse Ned had requested, a shaggy, ill-tempered Garen with hooves like dinner plates. Not a charger. A mountain goat in horse form. He bites, the groom warned, handing over the reins. We have that in common, Ned muttered, swinging into the saddle. He patted the beast's neck, reaching out with his mind, not with the force, just with intent. Calm. Work. The horse huffed, settling slightly. Jonaran stepped forward, placing a hand on Ned's knee. There are way castles along the high road, but once you pass the bloody gate, you must avoid the paths. The clans watch them. I know, John, Ned said, looking down at the mentor who had saved his life by defying a king. I'll stick to the ridges. They won't look for a lone rider where the air is too thin to breathe. May the Seven watch over you, my son, John whispered, his voice cracking. Oi! Robert shouted, stepping up and slapping the horse's flank, making it dance sideways. Don't get lost, Stark. And if you see Rhaegar, save him for me. Ned looked at Robert. He saw the fire in his eyes, the grief, the loyalty. He saw the king he would become and the friend he was now. I'll see you on the Trident, Bobby, Ned called out, ignoring Robert's scowl at the nickname. Go on then. Robert yelled, raising his hammer in a salute. Run, wolf. Run back to your snow. Ned turned the Garen's head toward the gate. He didn't look back. He couldn't afford to. The warmth of the Eyrie, the safety of friendship, it was all behind him now. Ahead lay the mountains of the moon. Cold. Jagged. Teeming with enemies. Ned smiled, a cold, sharp smile that felt entirely new on his face. He checked his mental map, felt the 10x potential coiled in his muscles, and dug his heels in. Let's go, he whispered to the wind. Tutorials over. The horse broke into a gallop, thundering out of the gates and into the shadow of the mountains. Chapter 4, The High Road and the Low Road. The Mountains of the Moon? Yeah, they couldn't care less about titles. They didn't care about honor, ancient bloodlines, or the fact that the lone rider trying to navigate their crazy peaks was actually a reincarnated soul from a world with indoor plumbing. They only cared about one thing, gravity. And honestly, they seemed pretty offended that Ned Stark hadn't fallen off yet. Ned pulled his shaggy horse to a stop on a ridge that felt way too close to the sky. The wind up here was brutal, like a heavy hand trying to shove him right off the narrow track and into the mist below. He gave the horse a pat on the neck. Easy, girl. I know. It stinks. But hey, look at that view. And the view was pretty spectacular, to be fair. Jagged grey peaks tore at the sky, dusted with snow that never melted. Way down below, the veil looked like a green and gold quilt fading away. Ahead lay the fingers bleak, windy strips of land reaching out into the freezing sea. But Ned wasn't really checking out the scenery. He was trying to look at the air itself. Or, well, he was trying to. He closed his eyes, ignoring the dizzying drop. He'd been riding for 3 days since leaving the bloody gate. 3 days of silence, cold, and the steady plodding of hooves. In his old life, a 3-day commute would have been a nightmare. Here? It was basically a training montage waiting to happen. Feel the cold, he told himself, settling into the breathing rhythm he'd practiced yesterday. Don't fight it. Just accept it. Make it part of you. In all the Star Wars lore he used to obsess over, the Force was this energy field created by living things. But in Westeros, life was harder and sharper. The energy here didn't feel like a flowing river, it felt like jagged ice and iron. It was wilder. Old Gods stuff. He reached out with his mind. Day 1. Total headache. Complete failure. Day 2, thanks to that 10x multiplier turning a day of work into 10 days of practice, he'd started to feel a buzz like the static electricity of life. Now, on day 3, that buzz was turning into a map. He could feel his horse's exhaustion like a dull orange throb. He felt the moss on the rocks, a faint, sleepy green hum. And miles up, he felt the sharp, scary spike of a shadowcat on the hunt. Senses, better, Ned noted. Telekinesis, still pretty useless. He opened his eyes and looked at a fist-sized rock on his saddlebag. He focused on it hard. Lift. Float. Do the thing. The rock shook a little. It wobbled like it was drunk, lifted maybe a millimeter, and then flopped back down. Pathetic, Ned muttered. Yoda would be so disappointed. But deep down, he was grinning. A millimeter was progress. With the multiplier, that millimeter would be an inch by tomorrow, and he'd be throwing stuff by next week. He wasn't a Jedi Master yet, barely a rookie, but he was learning fast. Come on, he urged the horse. We're losing daylight. The attack happened at twilight, in a narrow spot called the gullet. Ned had sensed it coming for 10 minutes. It wasn't like he saw it. It was more of a disturbance in his force radar, a bunch of angry red spikes moving against the mountain's background noise. Bad intentions. 3 of them, Ned figured, hand drifting to his sword. Maybe 4. Hiding in the rocks up there. In the original timeline, Ned Stark might have ridden right into this ambush. He might have been lucky or skilled enough to survive, but he would have been surprised. This Ned Stark? Not surprised at all. He stopped his horse 50 yards from the trap. He hopped off calmly and tied the reins to a bush. Wait here, he whispered to the horse. Don't bite anyone unless they're wearing fur. He drew his sword. The steel hissed loud in the quiet canyon. You guys can come out, Ned shouted, his voice bouncing off the walls. I've got no gold. No wine. Just a really sharp sword and a bad temper. For a moment, just wind. Then, a rock clattered. Laughter floated down from the shadows. Rough, nasty laughter. The fancy man has ears, a voice rasped. 4 guys stepped out from the rocks. Classic mountain clansmen, filthy, wrapped in mismatched furs, hair matted with mud. One brute, the size of a door, held a rusty axe. The others had spears and spiked clubs. Burned men? Ned asked, noticing the scars on their chests. Redsmiths, the big guy corrected, grinning with black teeth. We take the metal. Your sword looks like good metal. Walk away, Ned said, shifting his stance. He didn't stand like a knight. He stood fluidly, something he remembered from a documentary, mixed with Ned's muscle memory. I'm in a hurry. We're in a hurry too, the leader growled. Hurry to kill you. He charged. It was sloppy. Just screaming and swinging wild, zero strategy. Ned didn't panic. Actually, time seemed to slow down. This was force speed, or at least the start of it. His adrenaline spiked, and the multiplier kicked in. He saw the big guy shift his weight. Saw the axe go up. Saw exactly where it was coming down. Too slow. Ned stepped forward, not back. He pushed the force into his legs, a burst of physical boost. Whoosh! He moved faster than a guy in heavy wool should be able to. He ducked under the axe, feeling the wind of it ruffle his hair. As he passed, he slashed his sword across the guy's legs. The leader screamed and dropped, legs useless. The other three froze. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The fancy lord was supposed to be scared. Who's next? Ned asked, spinning around. The three looked at each other, then rushed him all at once. Spear from the left, club from the right, spear from the center. Danger! Left! The force screamed the warning before Ned even saw the spear. He twisted his body weirdly, and the spear tip tore his cloak but missed his skin. He grabbed the spear shaft with his free hand. Grip! He didn't just hold it. He pulled with the strength of 10 men. The clansman holding it went flying toward Ned. Ned met him with a punch to the face that crunched bone. 2 down. The club guy swung for Ned's head. Ned blocked it, steel clashing on iron. The hit was heavy, shaking Ned's arm. Boost strength. Ned gritted his teeth and pushed back. He poured his will into his arms. He felt the burn, the surge of power. He shoved the guy back, staggering him, then followed up with a kick to the chest. The kick hit like a mule. The man flew back, hit the canyon wall with a thud, and slid down, out cold. The last guy, the one with the second spear, dropped his weapon. He looked at his buddies, then at Ned, whose eyes were wide and maybe a little crazy. Demon, the man shrieked, scrambling up the slope. Demon! Ned watched him go. He could have chased him, but he was tired. That burst of speed had drained him. He let out a long breath, steam puffing in the freezing air. He looked at his hands. Shaking a little. Okay, he whispered. That worked. That definitely worked. He wiped his sword on the dead guy's furs. The old Ned would have been sad about killing. The new Ned knew this was just the start. He walked back to his horse. The Garen looked at him, totally unimpressed. See? Ned told the horse as he climbed back on, wincing at his sore legs. Told you I'd handle it. Ned rode for another hour before finding a spot to camp. The moon was bright, casting sharp shadows on the snow. He was unrolling his bedroll when the hair on his neck stood up. Not a clansman. This didn't feel like angry human spikes. This was smooth, cold intent. A predator. Ned froze. Slowly, he turned his head. Perched on a rock 20 feet up was a shadowcat. A huge, scary beast, black fur, white stripes, glowing eyes. It was massive, easily the size of a pony. A normal guy would draw a sword. A stupid guy would run. Ned did neither. Warging, he thought. Starks have the blood. The force boosts connection. Let's test the theory. He turned fully toward the beast. He lowered his mental walls and let his aura flare out. He didn't try to control the cat, he wasn't strong enough. Instead, he sent an image. A wolf. A dire wolf. Giant, grey, and ancient. The boss of the north. He locked eyes with the cat. He poured his will into that look, channeling the cold authority of Winterfell and the raw energy of the force. I'm not a snack, Ned whispered, his voice sounding strange and deep. The shadowcat hissed, showing huge fangs. It flattened its ears. For a second, the air crackled with tension. The beast pushed against Ned's mind, hunger and instinct, but Ned held firm. Back down. The cat stared for a sec, totally confused. Why did this prey feel like a hunter? Then, with a grumpy growl, it broke eye contact. It turned and vanished into the shadows like smoke. Ned let out a breath he'd been holding forever. He slumped against the rock, sweat freezing on his forehead. Okay, he panted. Note to self, warging works. Also, terrifying. The next 2 days were a grind. The wiki of civilization was a lifesaver. When it got freezing, Ned found a recessed overhang. He found pine knots that burned even when wet. He built a wall of stones to reflect the heat. He sat by his little fire, melting snow in his helmet to drink. Meditation time. He sat cross-legged. He held a pine cone in his hand. Lift. He focused. He remembered the fight, the surge, the connection. The pine cone hovered. An inch. 2 inches. It spun slowly. Ned laughed quietly. It was a parlor trick, really. But here? It was magic. I can do this, he whispered. I can actually do this. He spent the night practicing. Pushing the pine cone into the fire. Pulling a stick out. Sensing around the camp. By morning, he was wrecked, but his mind felt sharper. The multiplier was doing its job. Every hour was worth 10. The last obstacle before the fingers wasn't a guy. It was the mountain. A landslide had wiped out the path. There was a 50-foot gap of crumbling rock dropping into a river gorge way down below. Ned stood at the edge, looking down. The wind howled. Well, Ned said. That's a problem. He looked at the horse. The horse looked back like, absolutely not. I can't leave you, Ned muttered. I need the speed later. There was a tiny ledge, maybe 2 feet wide, above the slide. Slippery, icy, and scary. Ned, chance with the force? He closed his eyes. He reached out to the mountain. Felt the rock. Felt the ice. He took a deep breath. Balance. He took the bags off the horse to make it lighter. He wrapped the horse's hooves with strips of cloth for grip. Then, he grabbed the bridle. Listen, he said, staring into the horse's eyes. He didn't just speak, he projected. He poured his mental strength into the animal's brain. Safe. Trust. Follow. The horse stopped shaking. Come, Ned said. He stepped onto the ledge. The wind tried to push him off. He planted his feet. He walked. The horse followed. Every step was a gamble. A pebble fell over the edge, taking forever to hit the water. Ned didn't look down. He kept his mind wrapped around the horse. Step. 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 The horse slipped. Its back leg went over. The animal panicked, dragging backward. No. Ned roared. He couldn't pull with his arms. He wasn't strong enough. He pulled with the force. He threw his hand out and screamed a command in his head. Up. It wasn't clean. It was a burst of desperate energy. It slammed into the horse like a shove. The horse scrambled and found footing. They stumbled onto solid ground. Ned collapsed in the snow, gasping. His nose was bleeding. His head pounded. He looked back. The gap was empty. They made it. The horse nudged him, snorting. Ned wiped the blood from his lip and chuckled weakly. You're welcome, he wheezed. 2 days later, the mountains finally gave up. The peaks turned into rolling hills. The smell of pine changed to the salty sea. The fingers. Ned saw the shivering sea, grey and angry, crashing against the rocks. It was bleak and desolate. And it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He rode into a fishing village just a few stone huts smelling of fish guts. People stared. He must have looked like a wildling king, shaggy beard, messy boots, torn cloak, crazy eyes. He stopped at a hut where an old man was fixing a net. "I need a boat," Ned rasped. Voice all hoarse. The old man looked him over. "Boats are for fishing. Storm coming. No sailing today." Ned hopped off. He walked up to the guy. Didn't draw his sword. Just stood tall and let that "I've cheated" death vibe wash over the villager. "I am Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell," Ned said quietly. "And I'm going home. You're taking me across the bight, old man. I'll pay you enough for a new boat. Or..." He let it hang. Not a threat of violence, but destiny. The old man swallowed. He looked at Ned's eyes and saw winter coming. "Stark," the man whispered. Ned smiled. A smile that said he'd just dragged a horse across a cliff with his brain. "Yes, Stark," Ned said. "Now, about that boat." As the skiff bounced over the waves of the bight, Ned sat in the front, looking north. He was exhausted. Everything hurt. But he felt more alive than ever. He held a hand out over the spray and focused. Boom! A drop of seawater froze right in midair, turning into a little ice crystal. It hovered for a second before he let it drop. The North was waiting. The Boltons, the Glovers. They expected a boy. Ned pulled his cloak tight and closed his eyes. The real game was just starting. Chapter 5, The Long Road Home. The shivering sea lived up to its name. It didn't just shiver, it convulsed, tossing the small fishing skiff around like a piece of driftwood in a washing machine. Ned sat in the prow, wrapped in his salt-crusted cloak, staring at the grey horizon. His horse, the poor shaggy Garen that had survived the mountains of the moon, was currently miserable in the center of the boat, tied securely and looking green around the gills. "Almost there, girl," Ned muttered, patting the horse's flank. "Just think of solid ground. And grass. Lots of grass." The old fisherman at the tiller looked at Ned with a mixture of awe and fear. He hadn't said a word since they left the Fingers, probably terrified of him. Ned didn't mind the silence. It gave him time to practice. He held his hand over the gunwale, watching the spray kick up as the bow smashed into a wave. "Focus," he told himself. "The water is just energy. Cold, wet energy." He narrowed his eyes. A droplet of water flew upward. Ned caught it with his mind. It wasn't a firm grip, more like trying to catch a greased pig, but he held it. He stopped it in midair, suspended against the grey sky. Freeze! He pushed his will into the droplet, imagining the molecules slowing down, vibrating less. The 10x multiplier hummed in his veins, amplifying his intent. The droplet turned white. Then solid. A tiny, perfect hailstone hovered for a second before gravity reclaimed it and it plinked into the sea. "One drop," Ned sighed, wiping the salt from his face. "Only about 1 trillion more to go before I can freeze a lake." Ahead, the coastline of the north began to take shape. It wasn't welcoming. It was a jagged line of cliffs and scrub, grey and brown and white. To anyone else, it looked like a wasteland. To Ned Stark, it looked like the best thing he had ever seen. The skiff scraped onto the pebble beach of a nameless cove south of White Harbor. Ned hopped out, his boots crunching on the stones. He helped the fisherman guide the horse off the boat, the animal snorting and shaking itself violently the moment its hooves touched land. Ned reached into his pouch and pulled out 3 gold dragons. It was a small fortune for a fisherman, enough to buy a new boat, a house, and probably retire comfortably. He tossed the coins to the old man. "For the ride," Ned said. "And for the silence." The fisherman caught them, his eyes bulging. "My lord, this is too much." "It's fair," Ned corrected, mounting the Garen. He looked down at the man. If anyone asks, you never saw me. You were just fishing for crabs and caught a good haul. The old man bowed so low his nose nearly touched the pebbles. I saw nothing, Lord Stark. Just the mist. Good man. Ned turned the horse north. He didn't look back at the sea. The tutorial level was officially over. Now he was in the open world. And the map was huge. The journey to Winterfell was a blur of exhausting riding and freezing nights. Ned didn't stop at White Harbor. He didn't stop at Castle Cerwyn. He avoided the holdfasts and the inns. Stopping meant talking. Talking meant explaining. Explaining meant delay. And Ned Stark was done with delays. He rode hard, pushing the Garen to its limit and then using the force to push it a little further. He poured his own energy into the beast, a technique he dubbed force stamina sharing. It kept the horse moving when it should have collapsed, but it left Ned drained, his head pounding with a constant, dull ache. The wiki in his head kept him company, analyzing soil samples he didn't care about and pointing out edible berries he didn't have time to pick. The nights were the hardest. He camped in the open, huddled under his cloak with no fire to give away his position. He slept in short bursts, 2 hours here, 3 hours there, always with one ear open, his force radar humming in the background. It was during these lonely nights that the reality of his situation really hit him. He was the Lord of Winterfell. Not the heir. Not the second son. The Lord. Father was gone. Brandon was gone. The weight of thousands of years of history, of a kingdom the size of the other 6 combined, was resting squarely on his shoulders. No pressure, Ned whispered to the stars. Just have to win a civil war, industrialize a medieval society, stop the ice zombies, and raise a family without getting beheaded. Easy. He closed his eyes and meditated, letting the cold of the north seep into his bones. Unlike the Vale, the energy here was welcoming. It felt familiar. Like coming home to a house you hadn't realized you missed. The old gods were strong here. The trees felt awake. On the 5th day, the wolf's wood began to thin. The trees gave way to rolling hills of heather and stone. And there, in the distance, rising like a granite fist from the earth, was Winterfell. It was massive. 2 huge walls of grey granite, towers that scraped the sky, steam rising from the hot springs that ran through the walls like veins. Ned felt a lump form in his throat. In his old life, he had seen it on TV. He had built it in Minecraft. He had read about it in books. But seeing it, feeling it, it was overwhelming. He spurred the exhausted horse into a final canter. As he approached the hunter's gate, the guards on duty stiffened. They saw a lone rider, covered in mud, riding a horse that looked half dead, wearing a cloak that looked like it had been chewed by rats. "Halt!" one of the guards shouted, lowering a spear. "State your business. No beggars allowed." Ned didn't slow down. He just pulled back his hood. "Open the gate, Jory," Ned rasped, his voice rough from days of silence. The guard blinked. He squinted. Then, his face went pale. "Lord Eddard." Jory Castle stammered, nearly dropping his spear. "Open the gate. It's Lord Stark. He's back." The heavy timber gates groaned open. Ned rode through, the hooves of his horse clattering loudly on the courtyard stones. Life in the castle seemed to freeze. Servants stopped carrying baskets. Soldiers stopped sparring. Stableboys dropped their buckets. Everyone turned to stare at the ghost who had ridden in from the south. In the center of the courtyard, 2 men were sparring. One was an older man with distinct mutton chop whiskers, Sir Roderick Castle. The other was a boy, lean and long-faced, moving with the quick, nervous energy of a pup. "Benyon." Ned brought his horse to a halt and slid out of the saddle. His legs felt like jelly. He stumbled slightly, catching himself on the horse's flank. "Ned." Benyon dropped his training sword. He stood there, frozen, his grey eyes wide with disbelief. He looked so young. Just a kid, really. A kid who had lost his father and his brother in the span of a single raven scroll. "I'm home, Ben," Ned said softly. Benyon broke. He ran across the courtyard, ignoring decorum, ignoring the mud, and slammed into Ned with a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of him. "You're alive," Benyon sobbed into his shoulder. "They said, the raven said Ares wanted your head. We thought." "I'm keeping my head," Ned said, hugging his brother back tightly. He felt the grief rolling off Benyon in waves, a dark, suffocating cloud in the force. Ned pushed back against it, projecting warmth, projecting stability. "I am here. We are the pack." "I'm here," Ned repeated. Sir Roderick approached, sheathing his sword. The old knight looked relieved, though he kept his composure better than Benyon. "My lord," Roderick said, bowing his head. "We had feared the worst. The North is restless." "The North remembers," Ned said, releasing Benyon but keeping a hand on the boy's shoulder. "And so do I." He looked around the courtyard. He saw the fear in the eyes of the servants. They needed reassurance. They needed a lord. "Roderick," Ned commanded, his voice gaining strength. "Have the maester send ravens to every holdfast. Tell them the wolf is home." "At once, my lord," Roderick said, a fierce grin breaking through his whiskers. Ned turned to a stably boy who was staring at him with his mouth open. "You take my horse. Oats, warm mash, and a thorough brushing. Treat her like a princess. She saved my life." "Yes, my lord," the boy squeaked, rushing to grab the reins. Ned looked at Benyon, who was wiping his eyes, trying to look brave. "Ben," Ned said gently. "I need an hour. I smell like a goat and I think I have moss growing in my boots. I need a bath, food, and a bed that doesn't move." "Of course," Benyon nodded, sniffing. "I'll have the kitchens prepare a feast." "No feast," Ned cut in. "Just food. In my room. We'll talk tonight. When my head stops spinning." The great keep of Winterfell was warm. That was the first thing Ned noticed. The walls were piped with hot water from the springs, radiating a gentle, constant heat that defied the northern chill. The bath was heaven. It wasn't just hot water, it was Winterfell water. It smelled of earth and iron. Ned scrubbed the grime of the mountains and the road from his skin, watching the water turn grey. He leaned his head back against the wooden tub and closed his eyes. He was safe. For now. The 10x multiplier had been working overtime on his ride. His body, though exhausted, felt denser. Harder. He could feel the muscle fibers repairing themselves at an accelerated rate. His mind, usually a chaotic storm of modern thoughts and ancient memories, felt organized. He ate the meal the servants brought: roast beef, turnips swimming in butter, and dark beer with the voracious appetite of a starving wolf. He didn't even bother with cutlery for the bread, he just tore it apart. Then, he collapsed onto the bed. It was a feather bed. It was soft. It smelled of lavender and clean linen. He was asleep before his head hit the pillow. He woke up to darkness. For a second, panic flared. Where am I? The mountains? The boat? Before the warmth of the room and the smell of the hot springs grounded him. Winterfell. Home. He sat up, rubbing his face. He felt rested. Incredibly rested. Multiplier, he thought. 10 hours of recovery in, what? 1 hour of sleep? He checked the candle mark. He had slept for 4 hours. So, effectively, he'd just had a 40-hour coma. He felt fantastic. He dressed in fresh clothes, simple stark wools, black and grey. He didn't need the silk anymore. He strapped his sword belt on, feeling the familiar weight. He found Benyon in the family dining hall. It was a smaller, more intimate room than the great hall. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. Benyon was sitting at the table, picking at a plate of chicken. He looked up when Ned entered, relief washing over his face again. "I thought you might sleep for a week," Benyon said, managing a small smile. "I slept enough," Ned said, pulling out a chair and picking up a piece of bread. "Now, we need to talk about the war." Benyon leaned forward, his eyes eager, the firelight catching the youthful hope in his face. "I've been drilling the garrison. We have 5,000 men ready to march within the week. I was thinking I could lead the vanguard, or maybe ride on your flank." Ned put the bread down and looked his brother in the eye. "You're not marching, Ben. You're staying here." Benyon recoiled as if slapped. "What? No. I'm a Stark. I can fight. Brandon would have let me come." "Brandon is dead," Ned said, his voice hard but not cruel. "And father is dead. And I am riding into a war that could easily end with my head on a spike." He reached across the table, covering Benyon's hand with his own. "Father always said it, Ben. Do you remember?" Benyon bit his lip, his anger warring with memory. He looked away, his jaw tight. "There must always be a Stark in Winterfell," he whispered. "Exactly," Ned said softly. "Winterfell is the heart of the North. It needs a Stark to beat. If I fall, if Robert falls, you are the last line of defense. You are the one who keeps our house alive. You cannot risk yourself on a southern battlefield." Benyon looked down at the table, his knuckles white. He hated it. Ned could feel the frustration radiating off him, sharp, jagged spikes in the force. But beneath the anger, there was duty. The iron core of their upbringing. "It feels like hiding," Benyon muttered. "It's not hiding," Ned corrected, squeezing his hand. "It's holding the line. It's the hardest job of all, Ben. Waiting. Ruling. If I die, you are the Stark. You keep the blood alive. Can you do that?" Benyon took a shaky breath, then looked up, his grey eyes clear. He nodded. "I'll stay. I'll hold the fort. I promise." "Good lad," Ned smiled, releasing his hand. "Now, finish your chicken. I have a date with the Gods Wood." After dinner, Benyon went to inspect the night watch, and Ned walked alone to the Gods Wood. The ancient forest was silent, save for the wind rustling the red leaves of the weirwood tree. The air here was thick with power, heavy, ancient, and watchful. Ned sat before the heart tree, the carved face weeping red sap. He placed his hands on his knees and closed his eyes. Multiplier active. He reached out. Here, in the heart of the north, the force didn't just trickle, it surged. He felt the roots deep in the earth, the sap flowing like blood, the connection to every living thing in the castle. He lifted a hand. A fallen leaf twitched. Then another. Then a dozen. They rose into the air, swirling around him in a slow, controlled vortex. "Okay," Ned whispered, opening his eyes to watch the leaves dance. "Now we're getting somewhere." Chapter 6, The Awakening of the North. Winterfell didn't just wake up, it roared to life. For the first few days after Ned's return, the castle had been holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But once the ravens flew and the riders were dispatched, the silence was shattered. The Great Keep became a hive of activity that would have made a chaotic RTS game look organized. The First Lords started trickling in within 3 days. By the end of the week, the trickle had turned into a flood of fur, steel, and shouting. The north was vast, empty, and generally quiet, but when you poked it with a sharp stick like, say, burning its warden alive, it woke up angry. Ned sat in the great hall, the high stone seat of the kings of winter, feeling cold and hard beneath him. "Lord Ricard Karstark," the herald announced, his voice cracking slightly under the pressure. The Lord of Karhold strode in. He was a gaunt man with a beard like a wire brush and eyes that looked like flint. He wore a cloak made from the pelt of a shadowcat. Karstark stopped before the dais. He didn't bow immediately. He looked Ned up and down, searching for the boy he remembered. "They say Ares burned your father," Karstark rumbled, his voice echoing off the rafters. "They say he strangled Brandon. And they say you rode through the mountains alone to call us." "They say true, Lord Ricard," Ned replied. His voice wasn't a shout, but he projected it using a subtle trick of the Force to make it resonate in the chest of every man in the hall. "The Mad King thinks the North will bleed quietly. I intend to show him otherwise." Karstark's eyes narrowed, then widened as the sheer weight of Ned's presence hit him. It wasn't just confidence, it was an aura. A heavy, static pressure that felt like the air before a lightning strike. Karstark fell to one knee. "Winterfell calls," Karstark swore, drawing his sword and laying it on the stones. "And Karhold answers. My sword is yours, Lord Stark. Until the last drop of blood." "Rise, Lord Karstark," Ned said, keeping his face impassive. "Save your blood for the Targaryens." This scene played out a dozen times a day. The Umbers arrived with the Great Yawn roaring about smashing dragon skulls. The Glovers arrived with their quiet professionalism. The Manderleys sailed up the White Knife with a train of supplies that made Ned's logistic-loving heart sing. Every time, Ned met them. He looked them in the eye, accepted their vows, and integrated them into the war machine he was building. He wasn't just a lord anymore, he was the gravity well that held the North together. But holding the North together required more than just speeches. It required power. And Ned Stark was determined to be the most powerful piece on the board. His routine became a punishing cycle of grind and growth. 4 o'clock, the witching hour. While the rest of the castle slept, Ned was in the God's Wood. The air was usually freezing dark, still, and biting. Ned sat cross-legged in the snow before the heart tree, wearing only thin breeches. "Cold is just a sensation," he told himself, shivering violently. "Control the sensation. Control the body." He closed his eyes. The force here was thick, ancient, and heavy. It didn't want to be moved. It wanted to sit like a stone. Ned had to wrestle with it. Lift. He focused on a heavy iron shield he'd dragged out from the armory. It lay in the snow, weighing 20 pounds. Ned extended his hand. He didn't visualize lifting it with muscles, he visualized the space around the shield warping, pushing it upward. The shield groaned. Then, it lurched into the air. 1 foot. 2 feet. "Hold it," Ned grunted, sweat freezing on his brow. The mental strain was immense, like holding a plank position with his brain. He held it for a minute. Then 2. Then, with a gasp, he let it drop. Clang. "Better," he whispered, checking his internal progress bar. The 10x multiplier meant that every morning session was worth a week of intense training. In 10 days, he'd essentially done 3 months of Jedi initiate drills. He could now sense the heartbeat of a squirrel across the God's Wood. He could lift heavy objects, though not throw them yet. And he could create a force push strong enough to knock a man off his feet, though it drained him to near collapse. 8 o'clock, the sparring ring. After a breakfast that consisted of enough calories to feed a small horse, Ned headed to the training yard. This was public. This was theater. The soldiers needed to see their lord wasn't just a strategist, they needed to see a warrior. "Who's first?" Ned asked, spinning a blunted tourney sword in his hand. At first, the guards had been hesitant. No one wants to accidentally bruise the Lord Paramount. But after Ned had casually disarmed Jory Castle 3 times in 10 seconds, the gloves came off. "Come on!" Ned shouted, dodging a swing from a burly Umber man-at-arms. "You fight like old women. 2 at once. Get in here." 2 guards circled him. They attacked simultaneously, one high, one low. In the old days, Ned would have parried one and dodged the other. Now? Force sense. He felt the intent before the muscles even fired. He saw the trajectory of the attacks as red lines in his mind's eye. Ned stepped into the attack. He caught the first blade on his crossguard, twisted his wrist to lock it, and then used his enhanced strength to shove the first man into the second. They tangled in a heap of limbs and curses. 3. Ned barked, sweat flying from his hair. I want 3. By the end of the week, he was fighting 10 men at once and winning consistently. He wasn't using flashy flips or lightning. He was using efficiency. He moved faster than he should, hit harder than he looked, and never, ever seemed to be in the wrong place. The rumors started spreading through the camp. The wolf blood, they whispered. 1300 hours, the war room. Afternoons were for the wiki. The Maester's solar became Ned's command center. He sat surrounded by maps, supply manifests, and confused stewards. My lord, Maester Whaley's tried to explain, we simply cannot forge enough spearheads in time. The smiths are working day and night, but the bellows are inefficient, Ned interrupted, not looking up from a map of the neck. They're using single-chamber lungs. Tell Mycon to switch to a double-chamber system. Continuous airflow means hotter fires. Hotter fires mean faster smelting. I sketched the design on your slate this morning. The Maester blinked. A double-chamber system? My lord, where did you learn of smithing? I read a book, Ned lied smoothly. Also, the grain carts. Why are we using square axles? The friction is slowing them down. Grease the hubs and round the bearings. We lose 3 hours a day just on bad wheels. As you say, my lord, the Maester stammered, scribbling furiously. 2100 hours, the night shift. After dinner, which was usually allowed, boisterous affair with the gathered lords to keep morale high, Ned returned to his chambers. But he didn't sleep. He practiced control. He sat at his desk, a single candle burning. He focused on the flame. Calm. He tried to suppress the heat. To shrink the flame without extinguishing it. It was a test of fine motor control for the mind. Sometimes, Benyon would come in. The boy was staying strong, adhering to his duty, but Ned could feel the longing in him. The Karstarks are loud, Benyon muttered one night, sitting by the fire. They think this is a game. They'll learn, Ned said, watching the candle flame dance. War has a way of teaching very harsh lessons very quickly. Are you afraid? Benyon asked suddenly. Ned stopped his meditation. He looked at his brother. Terrified. You don't look it. That's the job, Ben, Ned smiled tiredly. The Lord creates the weather. If I look scared, the storm breaks. If I look like stone, the men stand tall. On the 10th day, the army was ready. 14,000 men filled the fields outside Winterfell. It was a sea of grey and white, punctuated by the sigils of a dozen houses. The Giant of Umber, the Sunburst of Karstark, the Fist of Glover, the Merman of Manderley. The noise was deafening, the clash of steel, the whinnying of horses, the roar of thousands of voices. Ned stood on the battlements of the Hunter's Gate, Benyon beside him. It's time, Ned said. He turned to his brother. Benyon looked like he was trying very hard not to cry. You have the hardest watch, Ben, Ned said, gripping the boy's shoulder. Winterfell is yours. Keep it safe. Keep the people warm. And listen to Maester Whaley's, but trust your gut. I will, Benyon vowed. I'll make you proud, Ned. You already have. Ned walked down to the courtyard where his horse, a massive black destrier this time, a proper war horse, was waiting. He mounted up, eyes strapped to his back. He raised a hand. The trumpets blew a long, mournful note that echoed off the ancient walls. The gates opened. Ned Stark rode out, and the north rode with him. The king's road was a river of mud and men. The march south was a logistical nightmare that Ned managed with the obsession of a grand strategy gamer. He enforced discipline strictly. No looting. No straggling. Camp sanitation was mandatory. 3 days south of Winterfell, near the castle Cerwyn, they saw the banners of the dread fort. The Boltons had arrived. Roose Bolton rode at the head of his column. He was a pale man, his face smooth and unlined, his eyes the color of dirty ice. He wore armor of pink enamel that looked uncomfortably like flayed muscle. Ned rode to meet him, surrounded by the Great Jan and Rickard Karstark. "Lord Stark," Roose said. His voice was incredibly soft, forcing you to lean in to hear it. It was a power move. "The dread fort is yours." Ned looked at him. Force sense, active. Most men gave off a buzz in the force emotions, heat, life. The Great Jan was a roaring bonfire of aggression and loyalty. Karstark was a jagged rock of pride. Roose Bolton felt like nothing. It was like looking into a void. A cold, empty silence where a soul should be. It made the hair on Ned's arms stand up. The man was a sociopath, a creature of pure calculation. "Lord Bolton," Ned replied, his voice equally cool. "Your men are welcome. Take the rearguard." It was a slight, and Roose knew it. The rearguard was for stragglers and supply trains. The glory was in the vanguard. "As you command, my lord," Roose said, his expression not changing by a millimeter. But Ned felt a tiny, sharp flicker in the force. A needle of malice. "I see you," Ned thought. "And I'm watching." "Keep an eye on him," Ned muttered to the Great Jan as they rode away. "The Leech Lord." Great Jan spat. "I'll keep a boot on his neck if you like." "Just an eye for now," Ned said. "We need his men." The march continued. They gathered the Hornwoods, the Cerwyns, the Tall Hearts. The army swelled like a snowball rolling down a hill. By the time the ancient towers of Moat Cailin rose from the mists of the Neck, Ned commanded nearly 20,000 men. Moat Cailin was a ruin, broken and sinking into the swamp, but it was the most formidable choke point in West Eros. 3 towers remained of the original 20, looking like rotted teeth jutting from the black bog. Ned rode up to the gatehouse tower. The air here was thick with humidity and the smell of decay. "Camp here," Ned ordered, his voice cutting through the humid air. "Umber, take the drunkard's tower." "Karstark, the children's tower." "Bolton, you hold the causeway." He dismounted and walked to the edge of the causeway, looking south. The neck stretched out before him, a labyrinth of swamps and lizard lions. Beyond that lay the riverlands. Beyond that, the Trident. And beyond that, the Iron Throne. Ned placed his hand on the mossy stone of the ancient fortress. He closed his eyes. He could feel the ghosts here. Thousands of years of Andal invaders who had broken themselves against the north. The moat was soaked in blood and magic. He breathed it in. Multiplier check. His connection to the Force was stronger than ever. The constant practice, the leadership, the sheer will required to move an army, it was all fueling his growth. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was becoming something else. A symbol. A force of nature. "My lord." It was Jory. He held a scroll in his hand. A raven had found them on the march. "From the Eyrie," Jory said, handing it over. Ned broke the seal. He read it quickly. "Jonaran has secured Gulltown. Robert sails for Storm's End. The Vale is secured." Ned exhaled, a cloud of white in the damp air. "Good. The board is set." He looked at the second part of the message. "Riverrun remains neutral. Hoster Tully waits." "Politics," Ned muttered, crumpling the scroll. "He waits to see what we have to offer." He threw the parchment into a nearby brazier, watching it curl into ash. "We rest tonight," Ned told Jory. Tomorrow, we cross the neck. We find Robert. And then? He looked south, his grey eyes flashing with a cold, terrifying light. Then we go hunting for dragons. Ned turned back to the camp. Thousands of fires were starting to burn, illuminating the fog. The north was here. The wolf had come down from the mountain. And he was bringing the winter with him. Chapter 7, The Caesar Maneuver. The war tent smelled like wet wool, stale ale, and a whole lot of angry men. Ned sat at the head of the map table, watching his bannermen go at it. It was basically a pack of wolves fighting over a carcass, except the carcass was a bridge they didn't even have yet. We storm the gates, the great Jan roared, slamming a fist on the table so hard the map markers jumped. We've got 20,000 men. Frey has what? 4,000? We smash through the twins and leave the old weasel in the rubble. And lose 3,000 men taking a fortified crossing, Roose Bolton said softly. His voice cut through the noise like a razor through silk. Valder Frey will stay behind his walls. He'll bleed us dry on the causeway. By the time we cross, the royalist army will be at the Trident. So we pay the toll. Ricard Karstark spat. I'm not bowing to that Frey. Why should he profit? He holds the bridge, Galbart Glover pointed out. It's the only way across for miles. Unless you want to march south to the Ruby Ford and meet Rhaegar on his own terms, we need Frey. Ned listened, keeping his face totally calm. Inside, though, his mind was racing. He stood up. The arguing stopped instantly. The heavy pressure of his presence, that subtle force aura he'd been cultivating, washed over the tent. Valder Frey thinks he holds the keys to the south, Ned said quietly. He thinks we're desperate. He looked at the map. The green fork cut through the land like a scar. I'm not spending northern blood on Frey's walls, Ned stated. And I'm not making deals with him. Then what do we do, my lord? Glover asked. Swim. Ned smirked. It was a sharp, dangerous look that made even Roose Bolton blink. Meet me back here in 2 hours, Ned ordered. Keep the men ready to move. We aren't storming the twins. We're going to make them irrelevant. Ned rode upstream with a guard of 50 men, Jory Castle, the Great Jan, who refused to be left behind, and some sharp-eyed hunters. They followed the river bank. The Green Fork was swollen with rain, the current fast and angry. It looked impassable. Perfect, Ned thought. He closed his eyes for a second, extending his senses just enough to check the ground, keeping it subtle so no one noticed. Terrain analysis. He felt the earth beneath the horse's hooves. He reached out into the water. 2 miles upstream, he found it. The river narrowed here between high clay banks. Beneath the rushing water, the bed wasn't mud. It was stone gravel, with hard sand underneath. Solid. Anchorable. Just like the Rhine. Ned hopped off his horse and walked to the edge. My lord, the Great Jan asked, looking at the water skeptically. It's deep. And fast. We aren't swimming, John, Ned said, staring at the water with the intense focus of an engineer. In his mind, he saw the pile's massive timber trunks driven into that gravel and sand at an angle against the current. He saw the crossbeams, the trestles. He saw Julius Caesar's greatest watch this moment, Riem agent for West Eros. We build, Ned said. Build what? Jory asked. A bridge, Ned replied. Our own bridge. We bypass Frey entirely. The Great Jan laughed, confused. A bridge? Ned, that takes months. Not stone, Ned corrected. Wood. We have a forest of reeds at our backs. We have thousands of men. And I have a plan. He crouched down in the mud, pulling a dagger from his belt. The soldiers gathered around as Ned began to carve lines into the wet earth. We don't use nails, Ned explained, sketching a complex joint. Iron rusts in the water. Wood swells. He looked up at the confused carpenters he had summoned. Mortise and tenon. The cross beams lock into the piles like a puzzle. The weight of the bridge itself tightens the joint. One of the master carpenters frowned. My lord, to cut joints that precise, it would take a master craftsman days. Ned stood up. He walked over to a fallen pine log. He grabbed a saw. His hands moved with a blur of speed and precision that shouldn't have been possible for a high lord. In under a minute, he had cut a perfect, seamless tenon joint. He tossed the saw to the stunned carpenter. It takes minutes, Ned said evenly. If you know what you're doing. Now, measure the width. I want 20 pile drivers built by sunset. Back in the war tent, the reaction was mixed. When Ned laid out the charcoal sketch angled struts, trestles, piles driven into the riverbed, the lords stared at it like he was speaking Valyrian. A wooden bridge. Lord Searwyn frowned. In this current, driven deep into the gravel and sand, Ned explained, pointing to the diagram. Braced against the flow. See these upstream piles? They break the water's force before it hits the main supports. It's clever, Helman Tallheart admitted. But driving piles takes time. We work in shifts, Ned said. Day and night. Torches along the banks. Assembly lines. He looked around the table. Give me 4 days. If it's not standing in 4 days, we storm the twins. Do I have your accord? The Great Jan looked at the drawing, then at Ned. He grinned. 4 days to make the Frey Lord look like a fool? I'm in. Carhold stands with you, Ricard nodded. One by one, the lords agreed. It was crazy, but it was stark crazy. The next few days were a blur of sawdust, sweat, and noise. Ned turned the riverbank into a factory. He designed simple pile drivers, heavy logs suspended from tripods. Gravity did the work. Thump. 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 The sound echoed across the valley day and night. But it wasn't just the common soldiers working. The spirit of the endeavor had caught fire. At one of the pile drivers, a team of horses was struggling to hoist the massive oak log for the next strike. The mud was slick, and the beasts were sliding. Out of the way, a booming voice roared. The Great Jan stripped off his mail and his tunic, standing bare-chested in the freezing rain, steam rising from his massive shoulders. Heave, you runts! He grabbed the thick hemp rope. Ned, seeing the struggle, stepped in beside him. He grabbed the rope too. Together! Ned shouted. Ned pulled. The Great Jan pulled. The log, which had stalled the horses, flew up the track as if it weighed nothing. The Great Jan looked at the log, then at Ned, a wide grin splitting his bearded face. By the old gods, Stark! You've got the strength of a giant in you. Just good leverage, John, Ned grunted, slapping the giant on the back. Again. Ned was everywhere. He didn't sleep much, using his meditation to refresh his mind in minutes rather than hours. But he was careful. He kept his force powers strictly internal. No floating logs, no super strength in front of the men unless it could be explained away as adrenaline. But they weren't alone. On the first day of construction, Jory spotted them. Scouts, Jory said, pointing to the ridge. Frey colors. Let them watch, Ned said, not looking up from a blueprint. Let them run back to Valder and tell him what we're doing. The scouts did exactly that. And Valder Frey, realizing he was about to lose his leverage, didn't just sit there. On the second night, under the cover of a storm, they tried it. It was pitch black. The rain was coming down in sheets, obscuring the river entirely. Ned stood on the bank with Jory and a dozen Karstark archers. The men were straining their eyes, peering into the void, seeing nothing. My lord, we can't see a hand in front of our faces, Jory whispered. If they come, we won't know until the bridge is burning. Ned closed his eyes. He blocked out the sound of the rain. He blocked out the cold. Force sense, active. The world lit up in his mind. The cold, rushing water was a blue torrent. And there drifting silently downstream were 5 distinct clusters of jagged red heat. Hostile intent. Men with pitch and torches, holding their breath. They're here, Ned whispered. He pointed to a patch of empty darkness in the middle of the river. 3 degrees left, Jory. Range, 40 yards. Fire. Jory hesitated. My lord. Fire. Ned ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. The archers loosed. A volley of arrows hissed into the dark. A second later, a scream rang out, followed by a splash and the sudden flare of a dropped torch sizzling in the water. Again, Ned commanded, pointing slightly to the right. 50 yards. 2 degrees right. The archers fired again. More screams. More splashes. The remaining rafts panicked, the men diving into the water to escape the arrows that seemed to find them by magic. Jory stared at Ned, his eyes wide in the gloom. How did you see them? The wolf has good ears, Ned said simply, turning back to the camp. Keep watch, Jory. They won't try again. They're getting desperate, the great Jan laughed the next morning, watching a stray raft float by. Good, Ned said. Desperate men make mistakes. On the 3rd day, the bridge was nearly done. The decking was being laid. A rider approached from the twins. It wasn't a soldier this time. It was Stavron Frey, Valder's heir. He rode up to the construction site, looking nervous as he passed lines of rugged Northmen glaring at him. Ned rode out to meet him, flanked by Great Jan and Roose Bolton. Lord Stark, Stavron said, forcing a smile. My father. Lord Valder sends his greetings. Lord Valder wishes to extend an invitation, Stavron continued, sweating slightly. He invites you and your banner lords to the twins. To feast. To discuss matters of the realm. Ned looked at the bridge, then back at Stavron. Thank your father for the invitation, Ned said politely. But as you can see, we are busy. We have a war to catch. But surely, Stavron pressed, a meal? A talk? My father is eager to. The great Jan stepped forward, his hand resting on the pommel of his massive sword. He didn't say a word. He just glared. Behind him, Ricard Karstark spat on the ground. Roose Bolton just stared with those pale, dead eyes. Stavron looked at the lords. He looked at the bridge that was about to make his family's toll booth worthless. He realized he was in a room full of wolves, and he was a weasel. He shut his mouth. I will visit after the war, Ned added, signaling the conversation was over. Safe ride back, Sir Stavron. Stavron turned his horse and hurried away. By the dawn of the 4th day, the bridge was finished. It was rough timber, smelling of sap and mud, but it was solid. It spanned the Green Fork completely. Ned stood on the bank, watching his army cheer. They had beaten the river, and they had beaten the Freys, all without swinging a sword in anger. Form the columns, Ned ordered. Cavalry first. Baggage in the center. Infantry rear. We cross now. The crossing took all day. Ned stayed at the bridgehead, watching the steel river flow over the wooden one. He felt a fierce pride. This was his work. His knowledge. When the last wagon rolled across, the north was free of the neck. Burn it, the great Jan asked, holding a torch. No, Ned said. Leave it. Let Valder Frey look at it every day and remember the toll he didn't get. He turned his horse south. The road to the Trident was open. We march, Ned commanded. Chapter 8, The Art of the Deal. The twins. Valder Frey was having a bad day. Usually, a bad day for the Lord of the Crossing involved a grandkid asking for money or a wife dying before he'd secured a replacement. Today, however, was special. He was trembling with rage. The twins were his toll booth. His leverage. He had waited, sitting comfortably on his fence, watching the dragons and the stags fight, knowing that eventually, someone would need to cross his river. And when they did, he would extract a price that would elevate House Frey to the High Lords. And Ned Stark had just walked right past him. He mocked us, Valder muttered, sinking back into his chair. He left the bridge standing. Yes, father. He said you could look at it and remember the toll you didn't get. Valder's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles were white. He thinks he's clever, Valder rasped. He thinks he can ignore me. But the war isn't over. The dragons have fire. Let's see if his wooden bridge can stop that. He looked at Stavron. Send a raven to King's Landing. Tell Ares, tell him the North has marched. Tell him I tried to stop them. Stavron blinked. But father, if the rebels win. If they win, we tell them the raven got lost. Valder snapped. Now get out of my sight. The King's Road. While Valder Frey fumed, the Northern Army was moving with a speed that defied medieval logistics. Ned rode at the head of the column, flanked by the Great Jan and Roose Bolton. The mood in the army was electric. They had beaten the terrain, beaten the Freys, and were now marching south with the momentum of a landslide. Ned, however, was focused on the horizon. Force sense, long range. He closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the horse's gait lull him into a trance. He pushed his awareness south. It was getting easier. The map in his head was sharper now. He could feel the cold damp of the Trident miles away. And he could feel something else. A large, orderly mass of life approaching from the east. Riders, Ned announced, opening his eyes. The Great Jan looked around. I don't see anything, my lord. Over that ridge, Ned pointed. 2,000 cavalry. Heavy horse. Veil banners. 10 minutes later, the first scouts crested the hill. They bore the Falcon of Aran. The Great Jan looked at Ned, shook his head, and laughed. I swear, Stark, you've got eyes in the back of your head. And the front. And the sides. Just good instincts, Ned deflected. Jonaran rode to meet them. The Lord of the Eyrie looked tired but relieved. When he saw the sheer size of the northern host, nearly 20,000 men stretching back as far as the eye could see, his jaw practically hit his breastplate. Ned, John breathed as they brought their horses together. By the 7, how? I expected you to be stuck at the Twins for another week. How did you get past Valder? We didn't, Ned said, shaking John's hand. We went around. Turns out, trees are free. He built a bridge, Lord Aran, the Great Jan boomed, effectively deafening everyone nearby. Built it in 4 days. You should have seen it. We left old Frey crying in his castle. John looked at Ned, seeing the changes in the young man he had fostered. The shaggy beard, the hardened eyes, the quiet confidence that seemed to radiate off him like heat. You surprise me, Ned, John said warmly. You truly do. Come, we ride for Riverrun. Hoster Tully is waiting. Outside Riverrun. The combined armies of the North and the Vale, nearly 35,000 men, camped in the fields between the Tumblestone and the Red Fork. It was a massive display of power. Ned stood in his command tent, looking at a map of the Riverlands. Jonaran stood beside him, pouring 2 cups of wine. Hoster has sent terms, John said, sliding a cup to Ned. He's opened the gates for a parley, but he's making his position clear. He wants security. He wants marriage. Ned took a sip. Swords for daughters. Exactly, John nodded. He proposes a double alliance. I am to marry Lisa. You are to marry Catelyn. John paused, watching Ned's face. It is a good match, Ned. Catelyn is strong, dutiful. She brings the Riverlands with her. Without Hoster, we are fighting the Reach and the Crownlands alone. Ned set the cup down. This was the moment. The divergence point. I can't marry her, John, Ned said quietly. John blinked. Can't? Or won't? Ned, I know you grieve for Brandon, and I know it feels strange to take his betrothed, but... It's not that, Ned interrupted. He turned to look at his mentor. I am promised to another. John frowned. Promised? Since when? Ricard never mentioned. Harrenhal, Ned said. It wasn't a lie. When the memories had flooded back in the Eyrie, the memory of Ashura had been the sharpest of them all. He remembered the haunting purple eyes, the smell of lemons and sea salt in her hair, and the whispered vows exchanged in the darkness of a tent while the tourney raged outside. He had promised to return. And he intended to keep that promise. Ashura Dane. John's eyes widened. The sword of the morning's sister? Ned, that was a dance. A flirtation. It was more than that, Ned said, the emotion in his voice entirely genuine. We made vows before the old gods and the new. I promised to return to her. I promised to marry her. He looked down at his hands. I cannot break that vow, John. Not for Hoster Tully. Not for an army. If I start this rebellion by breaking my word, what kind of king's justice am I fighting for? John sighed, rubbing his temples. He looked pained. Ashura Dane is Dornish. The Martells are loyalists. Her brother is in the King's Guard. Ned, this complicates things. Hoster will not accept a vague promise of friendship. He needs a blood tie. I know, Ned said. Which is why I have a better offer for him. Better than the Lord of Winterfell. The brother of the king, Ned stated. John froze. King? We have no king, Ned. We are rebels. We will win eventually, if not, then die, Ned corrected. And when we win, Aerys dies. Rhaegar dies. Who sits on the throne? Viserys is a child of a madman. Aegon is an infant. The realm won't accept another dragon, not after this. He pointed to the map, tapping Storm's End. Robert, Ned said. His grandmother was a Targaryen. He has the best claim. He is the charismatic leader of this rebellion. He will be king. John stared at the map, the gears turning in his head. Robert. King. He never wanted a crown. He doesn't want it, but he's the only one who can hold it, Ned argued. And if Robert is king, who is his heir? Until he has sons. Stannis, John realized. Stannis Baratheon, Ned nodded. He is currently holding Storm's End against the entire might of the Reach. He is iron, John. And when the war ends, he will likely be the Lord of Storm's End and the king's brother. Ned leaned forward. Offer Hoster Tully that match. Catelyn marries Stannis. She becomes the sister-in-law of the king. Her children will be cousins to the crown prince. She gets Storm's End, one of the strongest castles in the realm. And Hoster gets a direct line to the Iron Throne. John stroked his beard, pacing the tent. Stannis, he is a hard man. Not like Robert. Not like you. He is dutiful, Ned countered. And so is Catelyn. They understand duty above all else. They will respect each other. It's a solid match, John. Perhaps better than me. I belong in the north. My heart is, elsewhere. John stopped pacing. He looked at Ned with a mix of frustration and admiration. You really are your father's son, John muttered. Stubborn as a mule. It runs in the family. Fine, John agreed. I will marry Lisa. We will offer Catelyn to Stannis. But you have to sell this to Hoster. He won't like being told no. I'll handle Hoster, Ned promised. The Great Hall of Riverrun. Hoster Tully sat on his high seat, looking every inch the Lord Paramount of the Trident. He was a broad, powerful man, though his eyes betrayed the stress of sitting between two warring armies. To his right stood the Blackfish, looking grim and ready for a fight. To his left stood his daughters. Lisa looked terrified, clutching her skirts. Catelyn looked composed, her blue eyes scanning the men who had entered her father's hall. Ned walked in, flanked by Jonaran. The contrast was stark. Jon was the elder statesman, polished and diplomatic. Ned was the wolf dressed in simple grey wools, mud on his boots, ice strapped to his back, radiating that unsettling, quiet power. Lord Arryn, Hoster greeted. Lord Stark. You are welcome in my hall. Your hospitality is appreciated, Lord Hoster, Jon said smoothly. We have discussed your terms, Hoster said, wasting no time. The double marriage. It secures the North, the Vale, and the Riverlands in a single bond. We agree to the alliance, Jon began. And I would be honored to take the Lady Lisa as my wife. Lisa let out a small squeak, but Catelyn remained impassive. And Lord Stark? Hoster turned his gaze to Ned. Will you honor your brother's betrothal? Will you take Catelyn? The room went silent. Catelyn looked at Ned. He wasn't the wild, handsome Brandon. He was solemn, plain-faced, and intimidating. I cannot, Lord Hoster, Ned said clearly. Murmurs broke out in the hall. Hoster's face darkened instantly. Cannot. Hoster growled. You refuse? You march through my lands, ask for my swords, and refuse my daughter? Do you take me for a fool, Stark? I take you for a man who wants the best for his house, Ned said, stepping forward. He didn't shout. He didn't look apologetic. He just projected authority. I cannot marry Lady Catelyn because I am sworn to another. A vow made before the war. Vows can be broken, Hoster snapped. Especially vows made by second sons. Not by this son, Ned said. But I did not come here to insult you. I came here to offer you a crown. Hoster blinked. A crown. When this war ends, Ned said, his voice echoing in the hall, Aerys will be dead. Rhaegar will be dead. The Targaryen dynasty is over. A new king will sit on the Iron Throne. Robert, the Blackfish murmured, catching on. Robert Baratheon, Ned confirmed. He will be king. And his heir, until he gets an heir of his own body, will be his brother. Ned gestured to the south. Stannis Baratheon holds Storm's End. He is a man of iron will. He is the future lord of the Stormlands and the brother to the king. I offer you him, Lord Hoster. Hoster frowned, processing the pivot. Stannis? He is besieged. He might be dead already. He is not dead, Ned said with absolute certainty, thanks to the lore knowledge. He will hold. And when we lift that siege, he will be a hero of the rebellion. Ned looked at Catelyn. Lady Catelyn deserves to be more than just the wife of a warden of the north, Ned said, laying it on thick. The north is cold, hard, and distant. Storm's End is the seat of kings. Her sons would be cousins to the crown. They would walk the Red Keep not as guests, but as kin. He turned back to Hoster. Marry Lisa to Jon, the Lord of the Vale and the hand of the king, for that is what he will be. Marry Catelyn to Stannis, the king's brother. You will have a daughter in the east and a daughter in the south, binding the realm together. Or, you can marry her to me, and she can freeze in Winterfell while I brood about my broken vows. Hoster looked at Jonaran. Is this true? Robert will take the crown. He has the claim, Jon confirmed. And with your swords, he will have the victory. Hoster looked at Catelyn. She was pale, but her eyes were calculating. Stannis Baratheon. The king's brother. It was a gamble, but the potential payoff was higher than being the Lady of Winterfell. And what of you, Stark? Hoster asked suspiciously. What do you gain? I gain allies who are fighting for the future, not just a marriage pact, Ned said. And I keep my honor. Hoster sat back, drumming his fingers on the armrest of his chair. He looked at the black fish. Brynden shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. It's a bold offer, brother, Brynden said. Stannis is a sour man, they say, but he is highborn and durable. Hoster sighed. He looked at Ned with a mixture of annoyance and respect. Very well, Hoster grunted. Lysa Turin. Catelyn to Stannis Baratheon, assuming he survives. If he dies, Stark, we will have words. He won't die, Ned promised. Then we have an accord, Hoster declared. Riverrun stands with the rebels. The camp at Riverrun. The wedding of Jonaryn and Lysa Tully took place in the September of Riverrun. It was a hasty affair, lacking the songs and tourneys of peacetime, but it served its purpose. The banners of the trout were now firmly tied to the falcon and the wolf. Once the cloaks were exchanged and the vows spoken, the celebration ended as quickly as it had begun. There was no time for feasting. The camp outside the castle became a beehive of organized chaos. The Riverlands were waking up. Hoster Tully had wasted no time. Ravens had flown from the rookery of Riverrun the moment the accord was struck. Riders were dispatched to every holdfast from the Red Fork to the Trident. Ned walked through the camp, watching the preparations. He saw the black banners of House Blackwood, with their dead weirwood sigil, setting up camp next to the Stark wolves. He saw the purple eagles of House Mollister sharpening their spears. The Brackens, the Pipers, the Vances, they were all moving. Hoster didn't lie about his influence, the Blackfish said, walking up beside Ned. He was dressed in his scale armor, his helm under his arm. My brother has sent word to Stonehenge and Raventree Hall. They will meet us on the march. And the phrase? Ned asked, though he knew the answer. Still sitting in their towers, Brynden scoffed. Waiting for a winner. But the rest of the Riverlands is answering the call. We'll pick up another 10,000 men before we reach Stony September. Good, Ned said, looking south. We'll need every sword. He walked over to the map table that had been set up in the center of the camp. Jonaryn was there, looking tired but determined, flanked by Hoster Tully. He looked around the circle of lords. Northmen, Valaman, Riverlanders. 3 kingdoms united against a mad dragon. We march at dawn, Ned commanded. We don't stop for rain. We don't stop for sleep. We join Robert's army. The horns blew across the river valley, a deep, resonant sound that signaled the beginning of the end for the Targaryen dynasty. The massive host began to shift, turning south like a great, steel beast waking from slumber. Ned Stark mounted his horse, feeling the hum of the force. Chapter 9, The Stag's Fury. Storm's End. The wind howling off Shipbreaker Bay usually sounded like a woman screaming, but tonight, to Robert Baratheon, it sounded like a war horn. He stood on the battlements of his ancestral seat, the massive, drum-towered fortress that had defied gods and armies for thousands of years. The salt spray lashed his face, sticking in his thick black beard, but he didn't blink. He gripped the stone merlons with hands the size of hams, his knuckles white. They're coming, aren't they? Stannis stood beside him. His brother was grinding his teeth, a sound that was starting to grate on Robert's nerves more than the wind. Stannis was iron brittle, hard, and utterly joyless. Of course they're coming, Robert roared over the gale. Ares wants my head. He wants Ned's head. He probably wants your head just for being related to me. The Lords Grandison, Cafferan, and Fell, Stannis listed, reciting the intelligence report like he was reading a tax ledger. They have gathered their levies. They intend to march on Storm's End and deliver you to the king. Loyalists, Robert spat the word like a curse. My own bannerman. Turning on me for a madman who burns people alive. He turned away from the sea, pacing the ramparts. He felt like a caged animal. The energy inside him, the raw, chaotic fury that had been building since the news of Lyanna's abduction, was screaming for release. He needed to hit something. He needed to break something. They planned to join forces at Summer Hall, Stannis continued. If they unite, they will outnumber us 2-1. We should provision the castle and hold. The walls of Storm's End have never fallen. Robert stopped pacing. He looked at Stannis. Hide. Robert laughed, a harsh, barking sound. You want me to hide behind stone while they march on my land? While they laugh at me? It is the tactical choice, Stannis insisted. We hold. We wait for the north. We wait for the Vale. Ned is fighting his way through mountains, Robert growled. Jon is securing the Vale. I am here. Now. He grabbed his warhammer, which was leaning against the wall. It was a massive thing, iron and steel, heavy enough that most men needed 2 hands to lift it. Robert swung it onto his shoulder with one hand effortlessly. I'm not waiting for them to shake hands and drink tea at Summer Hall, Robert declared, his eyes burning with a terrifying light. I'm going to meet them. You can't fight 3 armies, Stannis argued. They aren't 3 armies yet, Robert grinned, a savage, reckless expression that made him look like the warrior himself. They're just 3 groups of confused men walking into a trap. I ride at dawn. He clapped a hand on Stannis's shoulder, nearly buckling the younger man's knees. You hold the castle, Stannis. If I die, it's yours. Try to smile once in a while if you become lord, eh? It confuses the peasants. And prepare for a long siege until the war is over. Summer Hall, the first smash. Summer Hall was a ruin. A tragic monument to Targaryen folly, where a king had tried to hatch dragons and burned his whole family instead. It was a place of ghosts and ash. Perfect for a battle. Robert arrived first. He had ridden his knights into the ground, pushing a pace that killed horses, to get there before the loyalists. They're coming from the north, south, and west, Robert told his captains as they sat amidst the blackened stones of the ruined palace. Grandison, Kaffaren, Fell. They think they're meeting here to plan my execution. He stood up, hefting the hammer. They think I'm cowering in Storm's End. They won't have scouts deployed for combat. They'll be in marching columns. Which one do we hit first? A captain asked. The first one that shows his ugly face, Robert roared. It was Lord Fell. His column emerged from the treeline just as the sun broke over the horizon. They were relaxed, banners fluttering, knights chatting in the saddle. They expected a rendezvous, not a war. What they got was an avalanche. Baratheon. The roar echoed off the hills as Robert led the charge. He didn't use tactics. He didn't use flanking maneuvers. He used pure, unadulterated shock. He smashed into the center of Fell's line like a cannonball. His warhammer was a blur of death. The first swing crumpled a knight's breastplate like tin foil, sending the man flying from his saddle with a shattered chest. The backswing took the head off a horse. It was a massacre. Fell's men panicked. They couldn't form a shield wall. They couldn't brace. They were scattered like leaves in a storm. Robert spotted Lord Fell's banner. Fell! Robert screamed, spurring his massive destrier through the chaos. You want my head? Come and take it. Lord Fell, to his credit, was a brave man. He leveled his lance and charged. It was a mistake. Robert leaned in the saddle, dodging the lance tip by an inch. As the horses passed, he swung the hammer. Crack! The sound of iron hitting the helmet was sickeningly loud. Lord Fell dropped from his saddle, dead before he hit the ground. With their lord dead, the army broke. But Robert didn't let them flee. He captured them. Bind them. Robert ordered, his chest heaving, blood splattered across his face. Throw them in the ruins. Quickly. The next one is coming. Summer Hall, the second smash. They barely had time to wipe the blood from their swords before the dust cloud of the second army appeared. Lord Catharin. He rode into Summer Hall expecting to find Lord Fell waiting. Instead, he found a scene of carnage, and then Robert. Surprise! Robert laughed, charging again. This time, the fighting was harder. Catharin's men saw the bodies and formed a hasty line. But Robert was in a frenzy. The thrill of battle was singing in his blood. He felt invincible. Every blow landed. Every block was perfect. He was a force of nature, a storm made flesh. He cornered Lord Catharin against a crumbling wall. Catharin yielded, dropping his sword. Smart man! Robert bellowed, grabbing Catharin by the gorget and hauling him off his horse. Chains for this one! Save him for the drinking contest. Summer Hall, the third smash. By the time Lord Grandison arrived, the sun was setting. The ruins of Summer Hall were choked with bodies and prisoners. Robert didn't even charge this time. He just lined up his army, now bolstered by the weapons and armor of the defeated, across the road. Grandison halted his column. He looked at the devastation. He looked at Robert, who was sitting on a pile of rubble, drinking wine from a skin, his hammer resting on his knees. "You're late," Robert called out. Grandison looked at his men. They were tired from the march. Robert's men were high on victory, covered in blood, looking like demons. Grandison sighed. He dismounted and drew his sword, then laid it on the ground. "I yield," Grandison said. Robert stood up. He walked over to the lord who had planned to kill him. He looked him in the eye. Then, he laughed. "Good. Because I'm starving. Let's eat." That night, amidst the ruins of the Targaryen dream, Robert Baratheon achieved his greatest victory. Not by killing men, but by winning them. He didn't execute the rebel lords. He didn't torture them. He ordered his own supply wagons opened. He broke casks of arbor gold. He sat Lord Grandison and Lord Catharin down at his own table. He drank with them. He joked with them. He told stories of the battle, praising their bravery, mocking their terrible timing. "You fought well, Catharin," Robert roared, slapping the man on the back so hard he nearly face-planted into his stew. "Next time, try aiming for the horse, not the rider. I'm too thick to kill." By dawn, the banners of Catharin, Grandison, and Fell were no longer loyalist. They were Robert's. He had turned enemies into fanatics with nothing but charisma and a few barrels of wine. "Now," Robert said, standing up as the sun rose, nursing a slight hangover but feeling like he could punch a mountain. "We have an army. Let's go find the rest of them." Ashford. The victory at Summerhall had been heady wine. It made Robert feel unstoppable. He marched west, intending to cut off the Reach before they could join the main war. "We catch them at Ashford," Robert told his war council. "We smash the vanguard, and Mace Tyrell will run back to Highgarden to hide in his flowers." But Mace Tyrell wasn't leading the vanguard. Randall Tarley was. Robert arrived at Ashford with confidence. He deployed his men, seasoned Stormlanders, eager fresh recruits from the defeated lords, and prepared to do what he did best, charge. But Tarley didn't play by Robert's rules. When Robert launched his assault, expecting the enemy line to buckle under the ferocity of the stag, he hit a wall. Tarley had positioned his men perfectly. Rows of spears, disciplined and unmoving. Archers on the flanks, protected by trenches. Robert smashed into the center, his hammer claiming a dozen lives in the first minute. But for every man he killed, 2 more stepped into the gap. It wasn't a brawl, it was a meat grinder. Push. Robert screamed, his voice raw. Break them. But they wouldn't break. Tarly's discipline was absolute. Then, the horns sounded from the south. The main Tyrell host. Mace Tyrell, arriving late as usual, but bringing 20,000 fresh swords. Robert looked at the sea of green banners flooding the field. He looked at his own men, tired and bloody. Damn it, Robert growled. He felt a sharp pain in his thigh. An arrow. Then a slash across his ribs from a knight he hadn't seen in the chaos. He was losing. The realization hit him harder than the hammer blow. He wasn't invincible. He was going to die here, in a muddy field in the Reach, while Lina was still. No, Robert snarled. Sound the retreat, he ordered, swinging his hammer to clear a space. Fall back. North. We head north. The retreat was messy. Tarly pursued them doggedly. Robert fought in the rearguard, holding the line personally to let his men escape. He took another wound, a spear grazed to the shoulder. By the time they shook Tarly's pursuers, Robert's army was scattered. He had a few hundred men left. The rest were dead, captured, or fled. He was bleeding. He was defeated. And he was angry. The flight of the stag. The march north was a nightmare. Robert's wounds festered. His leg burned with every step. He rode until his horse died, then he walked. When he couldn't walk, he leaned on his hammer. They crossed into the riverlands, avoiding the roads. The realm was waking up to the war now. There were patrols everywhere. They're hunting us, Sir Eddard, one of his surviving knights, whispered one night as they huddled in a wet ditch. Griffin banners. It's Connington. Let him come, Robert rasped. He was pale, sweating with fever. I'll kill him too. But he knew he couldn't. Not like this. He needed rest. He needed a wall. He needed a place to heal before he could swing the hammer again. Stony September, Robert decided, looking at the map with fever-bright eyes. It's close. The small folk there hate Ares. We hide there. It's a trap, my lord, Eddard warned. If they surround the town. Then we die in a town instead of a ditch, Robert snapped. Move. Chapter 10, Battle of Stony September. The River Road. The march south had been a grueling sprint, a race against a clock they couldn't see. Ned rode at the head of the vanguard, his eyes scanning the horizon. The exhaustion was there, gnawing at his bones, but he pushed it down, feeding his fatigue into the meditation techniques he'd practiced during the long nights in the Wolf's Wood. A rider crested the hill ahead, a scout wearing the trout sigil of House Tully. The horse was foaming, ridden near to death. Lord Stark, the scout gasped, reining in hard as Ned and the Blackfish approached. We found him. Or at least, we know where he is. Where? Ned demanded, his voice tight. Stony September, the scout wheezed. But he's not alone. John Connington has the town surrounded. Thousands of loyalists. They've sealed the gates and they're tearing the place apart house by house. Ned felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Stony September was a trap. If Connington found Robert before they got there, the rebellion ended today. How long ago? The Blackfish asked sharply. They started the search yesterday. The town is resisting, my lords. The small folk, they're hiding him. But they can't hold out forever. Ned didn't wait to hear more. He turned in his saddle, looking back at the column of Northmen and Riverlanders stretching behind him. Double time! Ned roared, his voice carrying over the wind. Drop the baggage. We ride for Stony September. If the horse dies, you run. He dug his spurs in. The time for strategy was over. Now, it was just a rescue mission. Outside Stony September. The town didn't look like a battlefield. From the ridge where the rebel coalition had halted, Stony September looked like a painted miniature slate roofs, cobblestone streets, and the shimmering ribbon of the Blackwater Rush winding around it. But the sound was wrong. It wasn't the clash of steel. It was the bells. They were ringing incessantly. Not in a rhythm of worship, but in strange, syncopated clusters. A low toll from the September on the hill. A sharp, high peal from a watchtower in the east. A chaotic clamor from the market square. Ned Stark sat on his black destrier, listening. He closed his eyes, filtering out the wind and the nervous breathing of the 30,000 men behind him. He pushed his awareness down into the town, reaching out with his mind as he had done with the Shadowcut and the river. It was a maze. He felt the heavy, rigid signatures of the loyalist soldiers, John Connington's men. They were frustrated, scattered, angry. They were moving in tight squads, kicking down doors, searching. But moving around them, like water flowing around stones, were the townsfolk. And deeper, hidden in the pockets of silence between the bells, was a burning coal of pure rage. Robert. They aren't raising the alarm, Ned realized aloud, opening his eyes. Jonaran frowned, looking at the town. The bells? Then why ring them? It's a code, Ned said, a grim smile touching his lips. The small folk. They're signaling Robert. Every time a search party moves, a bell rings to warn him. They're playing a game of cat and mouse. Then let's introduce the cat, the Blackfish said, drawing his sword. Ned drew his blade. This was a heavy, castle-forged longsword of good northern steel. It lacked the ripples of Valeria, but in Ned's hand, it felt weightless. Connington has his men dispersed, Ned analyzed, the knowledge from his other life overlaying tactical markers on the town below. He's doing a searching, though, not a defense. His perimeter is weak. If we hit them hard, we cut them in half before they can form a line. He turned to his bannerman. The Great Jan. Ricard Karstark. Roose Bolton. No quarter for the Griffin, Ned commanded, his voice cold. He is hunting Robert like a beast. Today, he learns what happens when the North fights. The North, the Great Jan roared. The Vale. Jonaran shouted. Tully, the Blackfish screamed. The horn blew a single, long, terrifying note that shattered the evening air. And the avalanche began. The breach. The charge down the ridge was a blur of motion and noise, but to Ned, it moved in slow motion. He let the familiar calm wash over him, his senses expanding until he could hear the individual hoofbeats of his horse and see the terror on the faces of the loyalist sentries at the town gate. An arrow flew toward him from the wooden palisade. Ned felt the disturbance in the air before the arrow even registered visually. He didn't block it, he simply leaned slightly to the right. The shaft whistled past his ear, missing him by an inch. He hit the gate at full gallop. The timber shattered under the weight of the combined vanguard. Ned's horse trampled a screaming man-at-arms as they burst into the streets. The town of Stony September instantly transformed from a search grid into a slaughterhouse. Connington's men were caught completely off guard. They were in houses, in cellars, in lofts. They spilled out into the streets, trying to form ranks, but the narrow alleys worked against them. Drive them! Ned shouted, swinging his sword. Ned fought like a force of nature. He cleaved through a spear shaft and the man holding it in a single swing. He used the momentum to spin, taking the leg off a knight who tried to flank him. The street fighting was brutal. It wasn't clean lines of battle, it was 1,000 knife fights in a phone booth. Ned dismounted. A horse was a target here. He moved through the chaos with a fluidity that unnerved his own men. He didn't just react, he anticipated. As they moved down a narrow alley, he suddenly sensed a sharp spike of danger from above. Ned ducked instantly. A crossbow bolt slammed into the wood frame of a stall exactly where his head had been a second ago. He looked up, spotting the crossbowman fumbling to reload on the low roof. Ned didn't use a telekinetic blast. Instead, he snatched a throwing axe from his belt and hurled it with terrifying speed. The axe spun once and buried itself in the crossbowman's chest. The man toppled from the roof, crashing onto the cobblestones. "Keep moving," Ned ordered, stepping over the body. "To the market square." The market square. The heart of the town was a cauldron of noise. The bells were deafening here, clanging madly as the battle raged. In the center of the square, the loyalists had managed to form a shield wall. Behind them, shouting orders, was a man in griffin emblazoned armor. John Connington. The hand of the king was fighting with the desperation of a man who sees his career and his life crumbling. He was good. Ned watched him for a second, analyzing. Connington moved with the grace of a trained knight, his sword flashing as he cut down a brave but foolish Mollister man-at-arms. But Ned wasn't looking at Connington. He was looking at the building behind him, a brothel with a painted peach on the sign. The door exploded outward. A massive figure burst onto the street. He wore no armor, just a torn tunic and breeches, but he wielded a warhammer that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. Robert Baratheon. Connington. Robert screamed with bloodlust. The stag crashed into the flank of the loyalist line. It wasn't a fight, it was demolition. Robert swung the hammer, and a shield shattered. He swung again, and a helmet caved in. A famous knight, Miles Mouton, one of Rhaegar's former squires, stepped forward to challenge him. Mouton was fast, skilled, and armored. He lasted 3 seconds. Robert took a sword slash to the arm, ignored it, and slammed the hammer into Mouton's chest. The breastplate crumpled. Mouton was dead before he hit the ground. "Robert!" Ned shouted, his voice cutting through the din. Robert turned, his face a mask of blood and fury. He saw Ned. For a second, he looked confused, then a wild grin split his beard. "Ned! You glorious bastard! Get back!" Ned warned, sensing the shift in the battle. Connington. John Connington had seen the threat. He realized his line was breaking. He saw the rebel leaders converging. Most men would flee. Connington, fueled by arrogance and loyalty to Rhaegar, decided to end the war right there. He spurred his horse, a white courser, and charged straight for Robert, who was on foot and wounded. "Baratheon!" Connington screamed, lowering his lance. Robert raised his hammer, bracing for the impact. He was too hurt to dodge. He was going to try and tank a lance charge. No. Ned moved. He didn't blur. He didn't teleport. He just ran. He ran faster than a man in mail should run, his legs powered by the internal coil of the force. He sprinted across the cobblestones, closing the distance with impossible speed. He didn't try to intercept the horse directly. He intercepted the angle. As Connington thundered past, focused entirely on Robert, Ned slid into the mud. He slashed his sword in a brutal, two-handed arc not at the man, but at the horse's front legs. It was cruel, but necessary. The heavy northern steel bit deep. The courser screamed and collapsed, its momentum sending it tumbling forward. Connington was thrown from the saddle. He flew through the air and crashed heavily onto the cobblestones, rolling through the mud. Robert lowered his hammer, blinking. The lance tip had missed him by a foot. Connington groaned, scrambling to his feet. He was dazed, his fine armor scuffed and muddy. He looked up to see who had unhorsed him. Ned Stark stood 10 paces away, his sword resting on his shoulder. His grey eyes were empty of mercy. "You," Connington hissed, spitting blood. "Bloody Stark! You missed," Ned said calmly. Connington roared, drawing his sword. "I'll mount your head on the Red Keep." He charged. It was a good charge. Connington was one of the finest swordsmen in the realm. His strikes were precise, powerful, and drilled into muscle memory by the best masters in King's Landing. Against anyone else, he might have won. But Ned Stark was fighting on a different level. He felt Connington's intent before the muscles even fired. To the onlookers, it just looked like Ned Stark was impossibly lucky or incredibly fast. Connington feinted high. Ned didn't block, he stepped inside the guard with casual ease. Connington slashed low. Ned pivoted, his steel deflecting the blade with a shower of sparks, turning the hand's own momentum against him. It wasn't a duel. It was a deconstruction. Ned didn't use telekinesis. He just used perfection. Every time Connington struck, Ned was already where he needed to be. How? Connington gasped, backing away, his breath coming in ragged tears. You fight like a storm. I'm a Stark, Ned said, advancing. And winter has come for you. Connington, realizing he was outmatched, shouted for aid. To me. Griffin Guard. To me. 3 loyalist knights broke away from the melee and rushed Ned from the sides. 2 from the left, 1 from the right. Ned didn't turn his head. He sensed them coming, jagged spikes of aggression in his mind's eye. The first knight swung a mace at Ned's back. Ned dropped to one knee at the exact right moment, the mace whistling harmlessly over his head. In the same motion, he swept his sword backward. The blade sheared through the knight's greaves and bone. The knight screamed and fell. The second knight thrust a spear. Ned grabbed the shaft with his left hand. To the observers, it looked like a desperate grab. In reality, Ned squeezed with force-enhanced grip strength, crushing the wood. He yanked the knight forward, directly into the path of the third knight's sword swing. Friendly fire! The third knight cut down his own ally. Before the third knight could recover from the horror of killing his friend, Ned rose and delivered a pommel strike to his helmet. The blow, amplified by his internal energy, dented the steel like a tin can. The man crumpled instantly. 3 seconds. 3 knights down. No magic visible. Just brutal, terrifying efficiency. Connington stared, his eyes wide with horror. He wasn't looking at a wizard. He was looking at a warrior who simply did not make mistakes. You're a monster, Connington whispered. I'm a brother, Ned said. And you hunted the wrong family. Connington, desperate, lunged. It was a sloppy, fearful strike. Ned sidestepped. He swung his sword in a flat, horizontal arc. The northern steel was sharp, and the arm behind it was stronger than any man's had a right to be. The blade bit through the gorget, through flesh and bone. John Connington's head spun into the air, a look of surprise frozen on his face. His body took another step before collapsing into the mud of stony September. Silence rippled out from the duel. The loyalists saw their commander fall. They saw the wolf standing over the griffin, the sword dripping blood. He's dead! Robert roared, limping forward, raising his hammer. Connington is dead. The will to fight evaporated. The loyalists threw down their swords. They turned and ran, scrambling over the walls, diving into the river, desperate to escape the town. The aftermath. The bells finally stopped ringing. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of fires. Ned wiped his blade clean on Connington's cloak before sheathing it. He felt the exhaustion now. Keeping the force contained, using it only to fuel his muscles and senses without letting it spill out into visible power, was draining. Ned. Robert limped over, supported by the great yawn. He looked terrible, covered in blood, limping, pale, but his grin was blinding. You got him, Robert laughed, a wheezing sound. I saw that. You cut him out of the saddle like a damn dancer. And then, 3 knights. Ned said, gripping Robert's arm. You look like hell, Bobby. I feel like it, Robert admitted. But I'm alive. Thanks to you. Jonaran and Hoster Tully approached, stepping over the bodies. The town is secured, Hoster reported. We're rounding up prisoners. A few escaped, but the army is broken. And our losses? Ned asked. Light, Jonaran said, looking relieved. Denisarin was wounded, took an axe to the pauldron, but he lives. He's with the maesters now. He'll make a full recovery. Ned nodded. In the original timeline, the Darling of the Vale had died here. Saving him felt like another victory against a dark future. We need to move, Robert, Hoster said, looking at the king-to-be's wounds. This is no place for the leader of the rebellion. The September, Ned suggested. The Septons can tend to him. It's defensible. The September of Stony September. Later that night, Ned sat on the steps of the town September. The air smelled of smoke and rain. He held a cup of water, staring at his hands. They were steady. He had killed a man today, a significant man, and felt nothing. No guilt. No hesitation. Just the cold satisfaction of removing an obstacle. You saved him. Ned looked up. It was Denisarin. The Darling of the Vale had his arm in a sling and a bandage around his head, but he was walking. I heard, Dennis said, sitting down gingerly. Connington broke through the line. He was coming for me before he saw Robert. If you hadn't intercepted him. He was focused on the stag, Ned said. You just happened to be in the way. Still, Dennis smiled. I owe you, Stark. My wife, she's with child. If I had died today. You didn't, Ned said firmly. Go home to them, Dennis. When this is over, live a long life. Dennis nodded. I intend to. They say you move like a wolf, Stark. I believe them now. He clapped Ned on the shoulder and walked back inside. Ned watched him go. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his senses one last time. He felt Robert sleeping heavily, his aura bright and chaotic. He felt the exhaustion of his own men. He felt the fear of the prisoners. Chapter 11, The Queen of Thorns and the Lion's Weight. The morning after. The sun rose over Stony September, burning off the mist that clung to the cobblestones. The town, which had been a slaughterhouse just 24 hours ago, was now a bustling military camp. Ned walked through the streets, dodging carts loaded with scavenged armor and crates of supplies. The townsfolk, rather than hiding in their cellars, were out in force, cheering the rebel soldiers. Someone had painted a crude stag and wolf on the wall of the September. It was badly drawn. The wolf looked more like a confused badger, but the sentiment was there. Ned ducked into the large command tent that had been erected in the market square. Inside, it smelled of poultices, stale wine, and aggressive masculinity. Robert Baratheon lay on a cot, his leg propped up on a stack of pillows. He was shirtless, his chest wrapped in bandages that were already spotting red. By all rights, he should have been unconscious or groaning in agony. Instead, he was throwing grapes at a map of Westeros pinned to a wooden board. Missed again, Robert grumbled as a grape bounced off the kingswood. He looked up as Ned entered. Ned. Tell these maesters to give me real wine. This poppy milk makes my head fuzzy. Your head is always fuzzy, Robert, Ned said, grabbing a chair and sitting beside the cot. And the maesters are trying to keep you from getting gangrene. Let them work. Gangrene, Robert scoffed. I've had worse scrapes falling off a horse. I'm fine. I could ride today. You could ride, Ned agreed. But you'd fall off in a mile and I'd have to carry you. And you're heavy. Robert laughed, wincing as the movement pulled at his ribs. Gods, it's good to see you, Ned. John Connington, that prancing fool. Did you really cut his saddle girth? It was the fastest way to get him on the ground, Ned shrugged. Horses are expensive. Hands of the king are replaceable. You haven't changed a bit, Robert grinned, shaking his head. Always practical. Even when you're killing people. Someone has to be, Ned said. He leaned back, looking at his friend. Any word from the south? Scouts are out, Ned said. But nothing confirmed yet. We know Rhaegar has returned to the capital. He's gathering men. Robert's hands clenched into fists. Let him gather them. I want him to bring every friend he has. I want to kill them all. The tent flap opened, letting in a burst of bright morning light. Jonaran and Hoster Tully entered. They looked grim, the victory of yesterday replaced by the weight of tomorrow. My lords, Ned said, standing up. Sit, Ned, Jonaran waved a hand. We have news from King's Landing. Our spies have been busy. Hoster Tully moved to the map board, picking up a charcoal stick. He drew a heavy circle around the capital. Rhaegar is marching, Hoster stated bluntly. He has convinced Ares to give him command. He's called the Banners. Who stands with him? Robert asked, sitting up straighter, ignoring the pain. The Crownlands, obviously, Jonaran listed. Root and stem. Ricker, Stanton, Stokeworth. And he has the Dornish. The Dornish. Robert raised an eyebrow. I thought the Martells were angry about Elia being treated like a hostage. They are, John said. But Ares reminded Prince Lewin Martell that Elia and her children are within the Red Keep's walls. It was a threat, plain and simple. Lewin is marching with 10,000 spears. 10,000, Robert spat. Spear chuckers. They'll break against our heavy horse. Maybe, Hoster warned. But that brings Rhaegar's numbers close to 40,000. He matches us, man for man. The room went silent. A pitched battle with equal numbers was a coin toss. It meant thousands of dead on both sides. It meant chaos. What of the others? Hoster asked, looking at the western and southern portions of the map. What of the lions? And the roses? Robert snorted. Mace Tyrell is sitting outside my castle, eating food. And Tywin Lannister is hiding under his rock. Tywin is the dangerous one, Jonaran said, stroking his beard. He was Handford 20 years. If he declares for Ares, we are flanked. If he declares for us, the war is over in a week. But he sits silent. He's a coward, Robert dismissed. He's a calculator, Ned corrected quietly. All three lords turned to look at Ned. He was staring at the map, his grey eyes unfocused. In his mind, the wiki of civilization was pulling up character profiles. Can you explain, Lord Stark? Hoster Tully said, intrigued. Ned stood up and walked to the map. He placed a finger on Casterly Rock. Tywin Lannister doesn't fight battles he might lose, Ned said, his voice steady. He hates Ares. We all know that. Ares insulted his wife, stole his heir for the King's Guard, and mocked him for years. Tywin wants the Targaryens gone as much as we do. Then why hasn't he marched? Robert asked. Because he doesn't know if we can win, Ned said. If he joins us and we lose, House Lannister is destroyed. If he joins Ares and Ares falls, he loses his influence. So he waits. He is sitting on the fence, watching the trident. He won't move a single soldier until the victor is decided. Ned looked at Jonaran. If Rhaegar wins at the trident, Tywin will march to King's Landing to save the city for the crown and claim he was delayed. If we win, he will march to King's Landing to sack it and prove his loyalty to the new regime. Jonaran looked disturbed. You think he would sack the city? I think Tywin Lannister would burn the world to ensure his family ends up on top, Ned said coldly. He is not our friend. He is a scavenger lion waiting for the kill. And the Tyrells? Hoster pointed to the Reach. They have the largest army in the realm. 60,000 men. If Mace Tyrell stops playing siege at Storm's End and marches north, we are crushed between him and Rhaegar. He won't, Ned said with absolute certainty. How can you be sure? Hoster pressed. Mace is a fool. Mace is a fool, Ned agreed. But his mother isn't. He tapped Highgarden on the map. The Queen of Thorns rules the Reach. Mace holds the title, but Olenna holds the reins. Think about their strategy. Why siege Storm's End? It's a rock. It has no strategic value once Robert is in the field. Why sit there? Robert scowled. Because Stannis is holding them. Because my brother is stubborn. Stannis is a hero, Ned agreed quickly to soothe Robert's pride. But 60,000 men could storm Storm's End in a week if they didn't care about casualties. They aren't storming it. They're camping. Ned looked around the tent, channeling the authority of someone who had read the strategy guides. Olenna Tyrell is hedging her bets. By besieging Storm's End, the Tyrells appear loyal to Aerys. They are fighting the rebels. But they are doing it in the safest way possible. No major battles. No dead Tyrells. No risk. If Rhaegar wins, Ned continued, Mace claims credit for holding the Stormlands hostage. He gets rewards. If we win, Mace bends the knee. Ned adopted a mocking, pompous tone, mimicking Mace Tyrell. We were bound by our oaths to the crown. We had no choice. But look, we didn't kill Stannis, we just starved him a bit. We are loyal subjects of the new king. Robert chuckled despite the pain in his ribs. That sounds exactly like the fat flower. Exactly, Ned said, his voice turning serious again. They will ask for forgiveness. And because they are fresh and wealthy and untouched by war, we will have to give it to them. A new king needs the Reach's food and gold. We can't start a reign by fighting another war against Highgarden. Hoster Tully stared at Ned, wide-eyed. That is, cynical. And brilliant. Ned shrugged. The Tyrells and the Lannisters are playing the long game. They don't care who sits the Iron Throne, as long as they are standing next to it. Jonaran nodded slowly,